Yo, what's up everyone? It's N.O. Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Gringotts Audit caught Dumbledore stealing and made Harry Lord of all Potter vaults? Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Audit. The letter that changed everything didn't come by owl. It arrived by dragon. Not a full dragon, Harry wasn't that lucky, but a small, brass-scaled courier drake no bigger than a house cat, which landed on the windowsill of number 4, Privet Drive at 6:15 in the morning and proceeded to breathe a thin stream of orange fire at the glass until Harry stumbled out of his cupboard and opened it. The drake dropped a thick envelope sealed in black wax onto the floor, fixed Harry with one amber eye, and left without waiting for a response. Harry stood in the hallway in his overlarge pajamas and stared at the envelope. It was addressed in sharp, angular script, nothing like the loopy handwriting of his Hogwarts letter from 3 weeks ago. That letter was still tucked under his mattress, read so many times the fold lines had gone soft. This one felt different in his hands. Heavier. The wax seal was stamped with a coat of arms he didn't recognize, a key crossed over a battle axe, surrounded by what looked like teeth. He opened it before Uncle Vernon came downstairs, because Uncle Vernon's opinions on correspondence had never once been useful to Harry. Mr. H. J. Potter, you are hereby formally notified that Gringotts Bank, under authority granted by the Goblin Accord of 1752 and the Wizarding Financial Oversight Charter, has completed an emergency audit of the Potter estate accounts, including but not limited to, the Potter Primary Vault, Vault 687, the Potter Legacy Vault, Vault 3, the Potter Family Trust, Vault 12, and all associated sub-accounts and investment portfolios. The audit has identified significant and systematic irregularities spanning the period of November 1, 1981 to the present date. As the sole surviving heir and, under Goblin law, the rightful lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, you are required to present yourself at Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, London, no later than August 30, 1991, for a formal reading of findings and execution of estate documents. Transport will be arranged. Please be ready at 7 o'clock in the morning on August 30th. A goblin escort will collect you. Ragnarok, Chief Auditor, Gringotts Bank. P.S. Bring the enclosed document with you. Do not show it to anyone. Do not discuss it with anyone. Particularly anyone named Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he read the postscript 3 more times, because it was the most interesting part. He'd received his Hogwarts letter. He'd met Hagrid, who had bought him an owl and a wand and explained, in broad and enthusiastic strokes, that Harry was a wizard, his parents had been murdered by a Dark Lord, and that Dark Lord had somehow been defeated by baby Harry in a development nobody had fully explained. Hagrid had also been very firm on the subject of Dumbledore, greatest wizard of the age. Don't worry, Dumbledore will have it sorted, Dumbledore knows best, and Harry had filed all of that away with the particular patient skepticism of a child who'd spent 10 years being told what was best for him by people who demonstrably did not have his interests at heart. He looked at the postscript again. Particularly anyone named Dumbledore. All right then, Harry said to nobody, folded the letter, and went back to his cupboard to think. At 7 o'clock on August 30th, a goblin named Sharpfong knocked on the door of number 4, Privet Drive with a sound like a hammer striking iron, handed Petunia Desley a document she apparently could not refuse to sign, and escorted Harry to a black carriage pulled by 2 horses that Harry was fairly certain were not horses at all. Their eyes were the wrong color, a deep, mineral gold, and they didn't breathe steam in the morning chill. They didn't breathe at all. Sharpfong did not make small talk. Harry appreciated this enormously. They arrived at Diagon Alley through an entrance Harry hadn't used before, a side door off a different London street entirely, which opened directly into a corridor of Gringotts marble rather than through the leaky cauldron. The corridor was private, lined with runes carved deep into pale stone, and it smelled of old metal and something older than metal that Harry couldn't name. Sharpfong led him past the main banking hall, past the queues of wizards waiting at teller windows, past a door marked private in 3 languages, down a staircase that curved in ways staircases weren't supposed to curve, and into a room that was clearly not built for wizard comfort. The ceiling was low. The chairs were sized for people shorter than Harry, which meant they were very short indeed. The table was heavy black stone and covered in neat stacks of parchment, a number of leather-bound ledgers, and a goblin who looked like he'd been doing this job since before Harry's grandparents were born. "Sit," said the goblin. Harry sat. "I am Ragnarok," said the goblin, without looking up from the document he was annotating. He had a face like a dried apple and hands that moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had handled a great deal of money and trusted none of it. "I have been chief auditor of Gringotts for 61 years. In 61 years, I have seen embezzlement, fraud, unauthorized transfers, estate manipulation, and no fewer than 3 attempts by sitting ministers for magic to reclassify goblin-held assets as state property." He looked up. His eyes were dark and steady. "What I found in the Potter accounts is the worst I have ever seen." Harry said nothing. He was watching Ragnarok's hands, which had stilled on the document, which told him, in some instinctive way, that this was the most important part. Ragnarok seemed to notice this. A small, dry something crossed his face that might have been approval. "The audit was triggered," Ragnarok continued, "by an anonymous tip submitted through our secure oversight channel. The tip directed us to cross-reference withdrawals from your estate against known external account holders. We did. The process took 11 days. He tapped one of the ledgers. "This is what we found." He pushed it across the table. Harry opened it. The first page was a summary. He was 11 years old and had spent no time in formal financial education, but he could read numbers, and the numbers were very large, and the column labeled authorized was empty in a great many rows while the column labeled withdrawn was not. He turned a page. Another. The ledger was organized by date, and it went back 10 years. The withdrawals followed a pattern, not random, not frantic, nothing that looked like desperation or greed. They were measured. Calculated. Recurring at regular intervals and at particular trigger points, his birthdays, the anniversaries of his parents' deaths, the starts of school years he wasn't yet attending. "Who did this?" Harry asked. His voice came out very flat, which was not how he'd meant it, but Ragnarok didn't seem to mind flat. "The authorized signature on the estate management documents," Ragnarok said, "is that of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He was appointed as executor of your parents' estate on November 2, 1981, the day after their deaths." A pause. "He appointed himself." Harry closed the ledger. He set his hands flat on the table, which was something he did when he needed to stay very still. He appointed himself. There was no will filed with Gringotts. Your parents' actual will, which we have now recovered from a secondary vault that was sealed and which Dumbledore apparently believed was inaccessible, names your godfather, Sirius Black, as primary guardian and estate executor. It names Frank and Alice Longbottom as secondary guardians. Ragnarok's voice had no particular emotion in it, but something in his delivery gave the facts an edge. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial 2 days after your parents' deaths. Frank and Alice Longbottom were tortured into incapacity within the week. Neither, therefore, was in a position to contest the arrangements. The room was very quiet. Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about 10 years of you're not special, boy, and don't ask questions and be grateful we took you in. He thought about going to bed hungry and wearing Dudley's cast-offs and the very specific expression on Petunia Dursley's face when she'd signed Sharpfang's document that morning, not fear, not confusion, but guilt, sharp and bitten down, like she'd been waiting for someone to knock on that door for years. "How much?" Harry asked. Ragnarok opened a different document. "From your primary vault, which was your parents' accessible savings, 312,000 galleons. From the family trust, which was intended for your education and personal upkeep, 187,000 galleons. From the legacy vault, which held assets accumulated over 7 generations of the Potter family, the complete liquidation of 14 investment portfolios, the unauthorized transfer of 3 properties, and the removal of several artifacts catalogued as Potter family heirlooms." He set the paper down. In total, adjusting for the current value of liquidated assets, approximately 2,400,000 galleons. Harry had no framework for what 2,400,000 galleons meant in practical terms. He understood that it was a very large number. He understood, from the careful neutrality with which Ragnarok delivered it, that the goblin considered it to be significant. Where did it go? Harry asked. A portion, roughly 60,000 galleons, went to the upkeep of your current residence, paid annually to your aunt and uncle. Harry thought of number 4, Privet Drive. He thought of his cupboard. They were paid handsomely. Another portion funded several scholarships at Hogwarts under Dumbledore's discretionary authority. A portion was routed through accounts associated with the Order of the Phoenix, a private organization Dumbledore leads. Ragnarok folded his hands. The remainder is more difficult to trace, because it was moved through a series of intermediary accounts with some sophistication. We are still working on the full picture. But you're sure it was him? The documentation is unambiguous. We have the signed withdrawal orders, the authorization letters, and the account instructions in Dumbledore's handwriting, sealed with his personal mark. Ragnarok held Harry's gaze. We are goblins, Mr. Potter. We do not make this accusation without certainty. Harry nodded slowly. There was something happening in his chest, not quite anger, not quite grief, something colder and more purposeful than either. He'd felt it before, rarely, when a situation became clear enough that he could stop reacting to it and start thinking about it instead. What happens now? He asked. Ragnarok permitted himself something very close to a smile. Now, he said, we execute the estate documents. And you become Lord Potter in full. The documents took 2 hours. Harry signed more parchment in those 2 hours than he had in his entire life. Ragnarok explained each piece before Harry signed it, which Harry appreciated. He asked questions when he had them, and Ragnarok answered without impatience, which was already making him one of Harry's favorite people. Not that the bar was particularly high. He learned things that morning that he probably should have been told at birth. The House of Potter was ancient and noble, a Wisingamot designation that meant, in practical terms, that the lord of that house held a hereditary seat in the governing body of the British wizarding world. He had voting rights. He had standing to bring legal proceedings. He had the right to formally declare family positions on matters of law and policy, the right to call certain debts, and the right to be addressed, in formal wizarding contexts, as Lord Potter. He also, apparently, still owned 3 properties, a townhouse in Godric's Hollow that had been willed to him directly and was therefore legally untouchable, a cottage in Wales that Dumbledore had attempted to transfer but which a contract clause had prevented, and the Potter family estate in Wiltshire, which Ragnarok had spent considerable time discussing with barely contained goblin fury. The estate was placed in a management trust by Dumbledore with himself as trustee, Ragnarok said, with the tone of someone who had rehearsed their composure. He cannot legally sell it because it is entailed property. However, he has been collecting the rental income from the tenant farms and the estate grounds for 10 years. He slid a page across. This is what that amounts to. Harry looked at the number. Right. There is also the matter of your magical inheritance. Harry looked up. Ragnarok opened the final ledger. When a witch or wizard dies, their personal magical artifacts, spell journals, research notes, and any constructed enchantments are recorded and passed to their estate. Your parents were both gifted and active magical researchers, particularly your mother, who developed several proprietary enchantment techniques in the field of, he checked the page. Sacrificial and blood magic. Innovative work. Highly valuable. Several of those techniques have been used, in the past decade, by parties who should not have had access to them. He closed the ledger. We believe those documents were removed from your legacy vault. We have not yet established where they went. Harry sat with that for a moment. His mother's work. Her research. Used by someone else, without permission, without acknowledgement. He thought about Voldemort. He thought about the scar on his forehead and the way Hagrid had gone very quiet when Harry asked exactly how a baby had survived the killing curse, and the way the answer had never quite come. "Can you find out?" Harry asked. "We are working on it." Harry nodded. He looked at the stack of signed documents. He looked at his hands, which were still a bit too small for the pen he'd been using, and thought that in about a month he'd be going to Hogwarts for the first time, and Dumbledore would be there, and Dumbledore would smile at him and offer him sherbet lemons and say something warm and wise, and Harry would know exactly what sat behind that smile. "I have a question," Harry said. "Yes. Is Dumbledore going to know that I know?" Ragnarok considered this. Gringotts is not required to inform him of the audit findings. He will, however, notice the change in estate authorization. His access to your accounts has been revoked as of this morning. He will know something has happened. He may not know the precise nature or extent of what we have found. "Good," Harry said. "I don't want him to know how much I know yet." There was a pause. Ragnarok looked at him with those dark steady eyes. "You are 11 years old," Ragnarok observed. "Yes," Harry agreed. Another pause. Then Ragnarok said, with what was for him considerable warmth, "The legal proceedings will require your formal participation. You will need a representative before the Wisengamot, someone with standing and knowledge of wizarding law. Can you recommend one? I can introduce you to several. There is also the matter of a magical guardian, given your age. Your godfather's case is one we can potentially assist with. His imprisonment without trial is a legal matter with financial implications for your estate, and Gringotts has standing to petition for review." Harry looked at him. "You can get serious blackout. We can initiate proceedings that make it considerably more difficult for the ministry to avoid the question." Ragnarok's tone was precise. "It is not the same thing. But it is something." "Do it," Harry said immediately. "That will require, whatever it requires." "Do it." He held Ragnarok's gaze. "He was supposed to be my family. He's been in prison for 10 years for something I'm starting to seriously doubt he did. Whatever it costs." Ragnarok studied him for a long moment. Then he made a notation in his ledger. "Very well," he said. "Lord Potter." They took him to the vaults in the afternoon. Not the primary vault, that was being documented as part of the legal proceedings, its current contents catalogued to establish the baseline of what remained after the withdrawals. They took him to Vault 3, the Legacy Vault, which required a different cart entirely, a deeper descent, and a door that didn't respond to keys. It responded to blood. The goblin who accompanied him, younger than Ragnarok, sharper-faced, who had introduced himself as Griphook with the particular brevity of someone who considered introduction a formality, pricked Harry's thumb with a silver pin and pressed it to the door. The response was not subtle. The vault door glowed white, then gold, then opened with a sound like the world taking a slow breath. Harry walked in. He'd expected gold. There was gold, stacked in old forms, coins he didn't recognize, bars of various metals, objects whose purpose he couldn't immediately identify. But what stopped him in the doorway was the other things. Shelves along the left wall held books, not textbooks, not casual reading, but thick research journals in his mother's handwriting, the ink still dark and sharp, each one labeled in her precise hand. His father's Auror case files, sealed in their official ministry wrappers, but here, in his vault, where they belonged. Framed photographs. Not one or two, dozens, lining a side table, his parents laughing and waving, his mother throwing her head back in a way that made something twist hard in Harry's chest, his father catching a small Harry mid-air and spinning him while baby Harry shrieked with delight. He hadn't known there were photographs. Nobody had told him. There was a broom, not the latest model, but a Nimbus 1500, tagged with a label reading James, 6th year, first day on the team. There was a baby blanket in Gryffindor colors. There was a small gold locket with the Potter family crest. There was a letter, sealed and addressed in his mother's handwriting, that read simply, "For Harry, when he's ready." He picked up the letter. He did not open it yet. Not here, not in front of Griphook. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket and made himself look at the rest of the vault steadily. The items Dumbledore removed, Harry said quietly. What specifically is missing? Griphook produced a list. 3 research journals, specifically the ones dealing with your mother's later work. An enchanted mirror belonging to your grandmother. A set of family grimoires, spell books accumulated over several generations. And a portrait. He paused. Your grandfather's portrait. It would have been able to speak to you. Harry exhaled slowly through his nose. Right, he said. Add them to the list. Lord Potter, Griphook said, and there was something in his tone, not the smooth professionalism of Ragnarok, something rawer and more personal. Gringotts does not align itself with wizards against other wizards as a matter of policy. But this vault was under our protection. What was taken from it was taken from us as much as from you. His eyes met Harry's, level and unblinking. We take that seriously. Harry nodded. So do I. He spent another hour in the vault, not cataloging. Griphook was doing that, efficiently and without intrusion, but simply being there. Looking at his father's photographs. Picking up objects and setting them down. Learning, in the quiet and the gold-lit air, the shape of a family he'd never been allowed to know. By the time they rode back up to the main level, Harry had made several decisions. The carriage brought him back to Privet Drive as the sun was going low. Sharpfang handed him a leather satchel, his copies of all the documents, and a new key on a chain, engraved with the Potter crest. The account managers will contact you going forward through Gringotts Post, Sharpfang said. Not Owl. Not Ministry Channel. Gringotts Post only. Understood. Harry took the key. Thank you. Sharpfang gave him a look that suggested thanks were unnecessary but not unwelcome. Harry went inside. Petunia was in the kitchen. She heard the door and appeared in the hallway with the expression she always wore when something was happening that she couldn't pretend wasn't happening. She looked at the satchel and the key and said nothing. You were paid, Harry said. Not accusing, just stating it, watching her face. Every year. For having me. Her chin came up. We took care of you, you put me in a cupboard. He said it very calmly, which seemed to unsettle her more than anything else might have. You told me my parents died in a car crash. You never told me I had a godfather. You took the money and you didn't tell me any of it. He looked at her for a moment, at the tight lines around her mouth, at the way her hands were clasped together in front of her stomach. I'm not angry, he added, because it was true. He wasn't angry. He was something much colder and more settled than angry. I just want you to know that I know. Petunia said nothing. Harry went upstairs to his room, not the cupboard. They'd given him Dudley's second bedroom after the Hogwarts letters had started arriving, a concession that felt very small now given the full picture, and sat on the bed and opened his mother's letter. It was dated October 30th, 1981. The night before they died. My darling Harry, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am sorry. I am so sorry you have to read this at all. There are things you need to know that nobody will tell you if I'm not here to do it, so I'm going to tell you now, and I need you to listen carefully. You are a Potter. That means something. It means your family has stood for something in the wizarding world for 7 generations, not just wealth, not just bloodlines, but principle. Your grandfather Fleamont was a man of extraordinary integrity. Your father is the finest person I have ever known, which is saying a great deal because I've known Sirius Black since I was 17 and he once talked his way out of a dragon encounter using only a phrase book and absolute confidence. You are also a prince by my blood, which is your grandmother's family, and they were gifted in ways that Wizarding Britain doesn't fully understand yet. There are people who will want to tell your story for you. Who will want to manage you, shape you, use you as a symbol. I need you to be smarter than the story they're trying to tell. Dumbledore is a great man. I believe that. But great men can be wrong. I have watched him look at you. You are 15 months old and you have never done a single remarkable thing except exist and eat and occasionally levitate your own spoon, which you are very pleased about, and I have seen something in his eyes that I cannot name. Something calculating. He sees what you might become and he is already deciding how to use it. Your father disagrees with me about this. He trusts Dumbledore completely. I love James with everything I have and he is wrong about this. Trust the goblins before you trust Dumbledore. Trust your own instincts. Don't let anyone make you small. I love you past all measurement, my Harry. Mum. Harry sat with the letter for a long time. The evening came in through the window, slow and orange. Hedwig, his new owl, shifted on her perch and watched him with round golden eyes. Downstairs, the Dursleys moved through the rooms of the house with unusual quiet, as if they'd collectively decided today was not a day for loudness. He read the letter again. Trust the goblins before you trust Dumbledore. He thought about the fact that his mother had written this the night before she died. The night before Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. The night before everything. He thought about the way Ragnarok had said, "We are goblins, Mr. Potter, we do not make this accusation without certainty." He thought about how Dumbledore would look at him in a month, when the Hogwarts Express arrived and the school year began, and Harry knew something Dumbledore didn't know Harry knew. He was 11 years old. He had 2,400,000 reasons to be angry and he'd chosen, in that cold space in his chest, to be strategic instead. He had a mother who'd seen it coming and left him a map. He had goblins on his side. He had legal standing, hereditary rights, and a seat in the Wisengamot that nobody had bothered to mention. He had, for the first time in his life, a complete picture. He folded his mother's letter carefully, put it back in its envelope, and tucked it under the letter from Ragnarok in the satchel. He picked up the Potter family key and held it in his palm, feeling the weight of it. Tomorrow, Ragnarok had said, a solicitor would be in contact. A woman named Amelia Bones, who was head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and who had, according to Ragnarok, been looking for grounds to examine certain decisions made in the immediate aftermath of the war for the better part of a decade. She would be very interested, Ragnarok had said, in what the audit had found. She would be very interested in Lord Potter. Harry curled his hand around the key. "All right, Mum," he said quietly. "I'm paying attention." Outside, the last of the summer light faded off the identical rooftops of Privet Drive, and somewhere in London, in a tall building with carved stone pillars and the deepest vaults in Britain, 11 goblins were building the most detailed financial case in the history of the wizarding world. And somewhere in Scotland, in a castle that had stood for 1,000 years, Albus Dumbledore sat behind his desk, unaware, and thought about the school year beginning, and what useful shape a young boy's life might be pressed into, given enough time and enough care. He had no idea that the ground had already moved. He had no idea that it was never going to stop. Chapter 2, Lord Potter. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was there at 10:15, which gave him 45 minutes to find a compartment, stow his trunk, and settle Hedwig before the platform filled up with the particular controlled chaos of families saying goodbye. He'd come alone. Sharpfang had arranged a car from a goblin-affiliated service, no conversation, no questions, just a black saloon that deposited him at King's Cross and left. The Dursleys hadn't offered to come. Harry hadn't asked. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, watched a family of redheads go through it one by one with the casual confidence of people who'd done it 100 times, and walked through after them without breaking stride. The Scarlet engine was already breathing steam. The platform smelled of coal smoke and pastry from the trolley at the far end, and somewhere a cat was making its displeasure loudly known. Harry loaded his trunk, got Hedwig settled in the luggage rack of an empty compartment near the middle of the train, and sat down facing the window. He had a book in his bag, not a school text, but a slim volume Ragnarok had added to his satchel almost as an afterthought, titled The Rights and Responsibilities of the Ancient and Noble Houses, a Practical Guide. He'd read half of it already. He was starting to understand that the wizarding world had 2 layers, the one everybody talked about, with Hogwarts and Quidditch, and which family had the oldest bloodline, and the one underneath it, where actual power moved, where seats and proxies and formal declarations meant the difference between being heard and being managed. Dumbledore had kept him thoroughly away from the second layer. That was not an accident. The compartment door slid open. A girl came in carrying a very large book, followed by a cat that was clearly not happy about any of this, and she sat down across from Harry with the precision of someone claiming territory before anyone else could. She had bushy brown hair and the expression of someone who was about to have an excellent year and was determined not to let uncertainty get in the way of that. "Do you mind? All the other compartments are filling up and some boys down the corridor threw something at Crookshanks and I decided I'd rather not spend the journey next to them." "Go ahead," Harry said. She sat. The cat, Crookshanks, apparently, gave Harry a long, suspicious assessment, then climbed onto the seat beside him and began washing its face, which Harry took as provisional approval. "Hermione Granger," the girl said, already opening her book. "Harry Potter." She looked up sharply. He was used to that, the sudden recalibration when people heard the name. But she didn't do what most people apparently did, which was stare at his forehead looking for the scar. She looked at his face instead, which he found considerably more comfortable. "Are you really?" she said. "Far as I know." She seemed to be deciding something. Then she said, "I've read about you," and went back to her book in a way that suggested reading about him had answered all the relevant questions and she was now satisfied. Harry turned back to his own book. Outside, the platform was getting noisier. "What are you reading?" Hermione asked, about 4 minutes later, in the tone of someone trying to sound casual and almost succeeding. He showed her the cover. She frowned. "Rights and Responsibilities of the Ancient and Noble Houses." She lowered her book slightly. "That's quite an advanced text for first years. It's not on any of the school lists." "No," Harry agreed. "Why are you reading it?" "Because it's useful." She looked at the book, then at him, then back at the book. He could see her making a decision, the particular expression of someone choosing between two approaches to a situation and picking the more direct one. "Are you from an ancient and noble house?" she asked. "Yes." "Which one?" "Potter." Her frown deepened, but it was an interested frown, not a disapproving one. "I didn't think, I read that the Potter family's seat in the Wisingamot had been inactive since," she stopped. "Since you were a baby, actually. It's been reactivated," Harry said simply. Hermione Granger set down her book entirely and gave him her full attention, which was, he suspected, not something she did lightly. "How recently?" "August 30th. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Is that why you're reading that book?" "You're preparing?" "Yes." She picked up her book, put it down again, picked it up a third time, and said, apparently to the window, "I've memorized most of the relevant sections on house law. I read everything I could find about how the Wisingamot is structured. Mostly because I thought it was interesting, not because I thought it would ever be. I'm Muggle-born, it's not like," she stopped herself and looked at him directly. "I could help. If you wanted. With the research." Harry looked at her. She was holding herself very carefully, which was the posture of someone who'd been told their enthusiasm was too much, too often. He recognized it. "Yeah," he said. "I do want." Something shifted in her face, just slightly, just at the corners, and she reached into her bag and produced a notebook that was already dense with neat handwriting. "I've been taking notes," she said, with the dignity of someone who had absolutely been hoping this would be useful. The door opened again around noon, this time to admit a gangly red-headed boy with a smear of something on his nose who introduced himself as Ron Weasley and immediately asked if Harry had anything to eat because the trolley had sold out of everything good while he'd been stuck at the wrong end of the train. Harry bought most of the trolley. This was a decision that required no particular generosity on his part. Gringotts had given him a reasonable sum for immediate personal use, but which produced, in Ron Weasley, an expression of such uncomplicated delight that Harry found him likable instantly. Ron Weasley liked Quidditch, distrusted theory, had 5 older brothers and 1 younger sister, and talked about all of these things simultaneously in a way that should have been overwhelming but somehow wasn't. He was warm and energetic and guileless in a way Harry found refreshing after a month of goblins, solicitors, and documents. He was also, within approximately 20 minutes, doing what his family had apparently trained him to do, which was gather information about Harry Potter. Not deliberately. That was what made it interesting rather than annoying. He wasn't asking calculated questions, he was just curious, in the broad and genuine way of someone who'd grown up hearing about Harry Potter the legend and was now sitting opposite Harry Potter the actual person eating a cauldron cake. "So Dumbledore must be over the moon," Ron said, reaching for another chocolate frog. "Having you back. My mum says he looked after things for you after, well, you know. After." Harry kept his expression very neutral. "Did she?" "Yeah, she thinks he's brilliant, well, everybody does, don't they?" Ron glanced at him sideways, something flickering in his expression that Harry couldn't quite read. "You must be glad. Having someone look after things." "I've taken over the management of my own estate, actually," Harry said, pleasantly. Ron's hand had stilled on the chocolate frog card he was examining. "Oh," he said. "Right. There was something there." Harry didn't push it. He filed it away and handed Ron another cauldron cake and let the conversation move on, and watched Ron's shoulders drop back to their natural comfortable position, and noted that Ron Weasley was someone who was more relaxed when things stayed on the surface. He wondered what Ron knew. Or what his mother had told him. Or more specifically what his mother had received, all these years, from an estate she perhaps hadn't looked too closely at the source of. He liked Ron. That was going to make all of this more complicated, and Harry was just going to have to manage that. Hogwarts was enormous in a way that even the photographs and descriptions hadn't prepared him for. It wasn't just the scale, it was the aliveness of it, the way the torches flickered with what felt like intention, the way the staircases moved with a kind of personality, the way the castle seemed to be noticing you noticing it. The sorting, which involved an ancient hat placed on each first year's head, turned out to be less alarming than expected. When the hat dropped onto Harry's head, there was a moment, it felt like someone rifling through a drawer with great speed, and then a voice said, privately, "Well. This is interesting." "Hello," Harry thought back. "You're not what I expected," the hat said. It sounded thoughtful. "Most of the Potters were Gryffindors. You've got the Gryffindor qualities in abundance, courage, determination, a fair bit of recklessness, though you've got it on a leash at the moment." A pause. "But there's something else. Something that's had 10 years to go quiet and is only now starting to stretch." "If you're going to tell me Slytherin," Harry thought, "I'd rather not." "Why not?" "Because I've got enough enemies without advertising it." The hat made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. "Gryffindor," it said aloud, and Harry went to the right table and sat down and shook hands with people whose names he immediately categorized by how they looked at him, the ones who saw the legend, the ones who saw a person, and the one girl with red hair at the far end who looked like she'd been hoping he'd sit next to her. Hermione ended up at Gryffindor too, looking quietly pleased with herself. Ron landed at Gryffindor with the air of someone fulfilling a family prophecy. Harry sat and watched the staff table. Dumbledore was easy to find, tall, white-bearded, with half-moon spectacles and the sort of calm, radiant benevolence that in Harry's experience meant either a genuinely good person or a very skilled one. Dumbledore looked out at the students with an expression of warm, paternal satisfaction, and his eyes moved, inevitably, to Harry. Harry met them. And smiled. Dumbledore smiled back, warm and genuine, and Harry kept his own expression easy and open and thought, "I know. You don't know I know." That is a significant advantage. The other staff he catalogued with interest. McGonagall, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, the kind of severity that came from genuine standards rather than cruelty. Quirrell, the defense teacher, jittery and turbaned and visibly uncomfortable with the hall, which Harry found odd for someone who'd supposedly faced considerable danger in his career. Snape, whose eyes moved to Harry with a sharpness that was nothing like the curiosity of the others, something else. Something old and complicated and not entirely friendly. Harry filed all of it and ate his dinner. Dumbledore made his move on the third day. Harry had been expecting something sooner, actually, a summons, a casual suggestion, an invitation to lemon drops and friendly conversation. Instead Dumbledore waited, which was either patience or strategy, and Harry was fairly certain it was both. It came as an invitation to tea, delivered by McGonagall during Transfiguration with a neutral expression that suggested she didn't know its precise purpose. Tea at 3 o'clock, Dumbledore's office, please bring your questions. Harry arrived exactly on time, knocked, and entered. Dumbledore's office was spectacular and carefully designed to be spectacular, the portraits, the phoenix, the silver instruments, the general impression of accumulated wisdom and whimsy. It was the office of a man who'd spent considerable effort constructing an image, which Harry noted without judgment. Everybody constructed an image. Dumbledore's was simply better resourced than most. Harry, Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone who'd been waiting for this specifically. Please, sit down. Sherbet lemon. No thank you, sir. He sat. Fawkes, the phoenix, regarded him from his perch with eyes that were considerably less theatrical than the rest of the room, clear and deep and genuinely ancient. Dumbledore sat back and looked at Harry with the expression Harry had been waiting for, the one his mother had described in her letter. It was benevolent and interested, and underneath both of those things, it was measuring. I imagine you have questions, Dumbledore said. About your parents. About your life in our world. Please know that I am here to answer whatever I can. I appreciate that, Harry said pleasantly. I've actually had a lot of questions answered recently, which is helpful. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, almost too small to catch. Oh. I spent some time at Gringotts over the summer. A longer visit than my first one. Harry kept his voice easy and conversational. It was very educational. Gringotts can be a bit overwhelming for a first visit, Dumbledore said, and his tone was carefully gentle. Particularly for someone unfamiliar with our world. I do hope you weren't troubled by anything the goblins may have said. They can be rather, they were wonderful, actually, Harry said. Very clear. Very thorough. He smiled. I came away with a very complete picture of my family's affairs. The silence lasted about 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Dumbledore's face did not change, and that itself was the tell, the deliberate steadiness of someone keeping an expression in place by effort rather than ease. I'm glad to hear it, Dumbledore said. If you have any questions about those affairs, about your family's history, about how things were managed in your absence, I'm happy to answer them. I was very close to your parents, and I took a great interest in ensuring your well-being. I know, Harry said. I've seen the documentation. Another silence. Dumbledore set down his cup. Harry, he said, and his voice had shifted, not colder, but stripped of one layer of warmth, the layer that was performance. Underneath it was something Harry hadn't expected, it was still warm, but different. More real. The warmth of someone who had genuinely convinced themselves that what they'd done was right. I want you to understand that every decision I made regarding your estate, your upbringing, and your position in our world was made with your best interests as my primary consideration. I believe you believe that, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. I mean it, Harry said. I think you genuinely thought you were helping. I think you thought having me grow up with the Dursleys, knowing nothing, in a cupboard. He watched that land on Dumbledore's face. I think you thought that would keep me safe and humble and ready. And I think you thought managing my family's money was something you were entitled to do because you'd decided you knew better than any document or instruction or basic property law. He held the old man's eyes. I'm not angry about it the way you might expect. I'm just done with it. The office was very quiet. Fawkes made a soft sound, almost a question. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked at him, the way Harry suspected he didn't often look at anyone, and Harry saw the moment when Dumbledore recategorized him. Filed him under something new and not entirely comfortable. "You are very young," Dumbledore said, carefully. "I've been told," Harry said. "Anything else you'd like to cover, sir?" "I've got charms practice." Word moved through Hogwarts the way words always did in enclosed social spaces, not in a single current but in a dozen simultaneous rivulets, each one slightly different, each one accumulating color as it went. By the end of the first week, a version of the story had reached most of the upper years. Harry Potter was Lord Potter. He had an estate. He had a solicitor. He had, according to one extremely embellished Hufflepuff retelling, an army of goblins. He had, at minimum, a very interested Draco Malfoy. Malfoy found him on the third-floor landing on Thursday afternoon, which was almost certainly not accidental. He had the air of someone who'd been rehearsing his approach, and he opened with the tone he seemed to consider sophisticated. "I hear you've been claiming a Wizengamot seat." Harry looked at him. Malfoy was pale and pointy and wore his family's consequence-like armor, which Harry recognized as a sign of someone who wasn't entirely sure of themselves without it. He'd met this type before. Dudley's friends had operated on a similar principle, deriving their power entirely from proximity to a central force. "Not claiming," Harry said. "It's mine by right. My father says the Potter seat has been vacant for 10 years. And now it isn't." Harry kept walking. Malfoy fell into step beside him, which was clearly not what he'd intended to do. It was the opposite of a power position. "He also says Dumbledore was managing the Potter affairs." "Your father is well informed," Harry said pleasantly. "He should probably update his files." Malfoy grabbed his arm, not hard, more instinctively, the gesture of someone whose reach usually stopped people. Harry stopped, looked at the hand on his arm, then looked at Malfoy. "The Malfoy family," Malfoy said, and there was something in his voice that was less arrogance than argument, like he was trying to make a case, "has seats on several key Wizengamot committees. If you're actually going to take up the seat, you'll need alliances. It's not as simple as just, are you offering an alliance?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. Malfoy looked caught. He hadn't framed it that way to himself and was now confronted with the fact that was exactly what he was doing. He let go of Harry's arm. "I'm explaining how things work. I know how things work." Harry turned to face him fully. "Draco. Can I call you Draco?" Yes, I suppose. You're trying to figure out which side of something I'm on before your father has to figure it out for you." He said it without cruelty. "I understand that. For what it's worth, I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for what's mine." He paused. "Whether your family ends up on my side of things depends on what your family decides to do next, not anything I've decided." Malfoy stared at him. Whatever response he'd prepared, it hadn't accounted for being talked to like a person rather than an obstacle or an audience. "Think about it," Harry said, and left him on the landing. Hermione was in the library when he found her that evening, which was not a surprise. Hermione's natural gravitational center was any room that contained catalogued knowledge. She had, true to the conversation on the train, been researching. Her notebook had acquired new sections. "I found something," she said before he'd fully sat down. "About the Wizengamot appointment procedures. Specifically about how an executor can be formally challenged." She turned the notebook so he could see. "There's a procedure called a right of estate review. Any ancient and noble house can request it, and it forces the sitting Wizengamot to re-examine any appointments made on behalf of a minor during their incapacity. The magic of it is that once you file the request, the proceedings become part of public record. They can't be conducted in closed session." "Meaning everyone knows what's being looked at," Harry said. "Meaning everyone knows," Hermione confirmed. "And there's a time component. Once filed, it has to be answered within 60 days, or the requesting party wins by default." She paused. Whoever helped Dumbledore cover this up in the Wizengamot, they can't just stall forever once a formal request is in. I've already got Amelia Bones working on the legal approach, Harry said. This would run alongside it. Double pressure, Hermione said. Institutional and legal. He can manage one. Managing both at once while also running a school, without it looking like he's trying to manage it, Harry added. Because the moment he seems defensive, he loses the perception. She looked at him over her notebook. You've thought about this quite a bit. I've had a month with not much else to do. She clicked her pen, Muggle ballpoint, Harry noticed, which he found quietly excellent. Can I ask you something? Yes. What do you actually want? She held up a hand. Not tactically. Not the legal steps. What do you want at the end of all this? He thought about it. Not the money was a practical matter, not an emotional one. Not even justice for its own sake, though that was part of it. He thought about his mother's letter. He thought about the vault, and the photographs, and the research journals. I want my parents to have existed as real people, he said. Not as symbols. Not as the story everyone keeps telling about them. He looked at the table. Dumbledore turned them into backstory. Something that happened to me. I want them to have been people who made choices and built things and left things behind. He looked up. And I want the people who helped make them into a story, who helped disappear them from my life, to answer for it. Hermione held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and made a note. All right, she said. Let's build the argument. Friday brought defense against the dark arts with Professor Quirrell, which was Harry's first opportunity to observe him in a teaching context. Quirrell was strange. Not strange the way new things were strange in the way of something that wasn't showing you its actual shape. He stuttered through the lesson, fumbling with his notes, startling when a student dropped their textbook. He had the class read a chapter on counterjinxes and answer written questions, which was the absolute minimum for a lesson that was supposed to cover basic defensive theory, and Harry sat in the back and watched him and thought about Ragnarok's measured voice saying the audit was triggered by an anonymous tip and wondered who had sent it, and why now, and who else had reasons to move the pieces before Harry's first year began. He looked at the turban. He'd never met someone who wore a turban before and had no opinion of it, except that Quirrell never took it off and seemed to be aware of it in the particular way people were aware of things they were concealing. What do you think of him? He asked Ron after class, keeping his voice low. Ron shrugged. Bit useless, isn't he? My brothers said he was different when he came back from his trip abroad. Said he went somewhere in the summer before last and came back all wrong. Came back wrong, Harry repeated. Like something frightened him. Properly frightened him. Ron made a dismissive gesture. Fred says he ran into something in the Black Forest. Whatever. He punched Harry's shoulder lightly. Quidditch tryouts are posted, by the way. You should go. I can't try out, I'm a first year. You don't know that until you try. Harry looked at him. He paused. That's actually fair. The letter from Amelia Bones arrived Saturday morning by Gringotts post, smaller than a standard owl, a compact grey bird with a beak like a chisel, which waited with professional patience while Harry read. Lord Potter, the right of estate review has been formally filed with the Wizengamot as of September 6. The 60-day clock is running. Dumbledore has been formally notified. Additionally, we have made progress on the serious black matter. There is no record of a trial. None. Not a cancelled trial, not a postponed trial, there is simply no record that one was ever scheduled. Given this, we are petitioning for immediate release on grounds that the imprisonment has no legal foundation whatsoever. You should be prepared for pushback. Dumbledore has allies on the Wizengamot who will not be pleased. Lucius Malfoy in particular has complicated reasons to want Black to remain exactly where he is. Remain unremarkable at school if you can manage it. A. Bones. Harry folded the letter and looked out the window at the grounds. Hermione was already at breakfast. Ron was still asleep, judging by the snoring from his corner of the dormitory. Neville Longbottom, who occupied the bed next to Harry's and who had yet to say more than 14 words to him but radiated an anxious kindness, was sitting on his bed feeding Trevor the toad. Remain unremarkable. Harry looked at the letter one more time. He thought about what Bones didn't know, that across the breakfast hall, in the chair he occupied at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was receiving a letter from his own father, and whatever was in it had made his expression go carefully blank. And at the staff table, Dumbledore sat with a letter of his own, Wizengamot Post, formal ministry seal, 60 days to respond, and for the first time since August 30th, Albus Dumbledore was fully aware that the ground had moved. Harry put Bones's letter away, picked up his bag, and went down to breakfast. He was 11 years old. He was lord of an ancient and noble house. He had a solicitor, a goblin bank, his mother's research notes, his father's photographs, and a friend who was already better at legal research than most adults. He had 60 days. He was not going to waste a single one of them. Chapter 3, The Weight of Gold. The Wizengamot chamber smelled like old arguments. Harry had never been inside it before, but Hermione had described it from her reading, a circular room deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, tiered wooden benches arranged in concentric rings, the kind of architecture designed to make whoever stood in the center feel the full weight of everyone watching. She'd described it accurately, but she hadn't mentioned the smell, parchment and candle wax, and the particular staleness of a room that had absorbed centuries of people insisting they were right. Amelia Bones had arranged a preliminary hearing, not the full review, just a procedural session to establish standing in timeline. Harry was not required to speak. He was required, as Lord Potter, to be present, which was why he was sitting in the gallery at 9 in the morning on a Saturday in October wearing proper robes that Gringotts had quietly arranged through an estate account, watching the seated members of the Wizengamot file in below. Hermione was beside him. She had a notebook. She had, in fact, 3 notebooks, plus a copy of Wizengamot Procedural Codes, 4th edition that she was cross-referencing with the agenda Bones had sent. Harry had stopped being surprised by Hermione's preparation levels and had started simply being grateful for them. Ragnarok was present in the gallery too, 3 seats down, in the formal dark coat Gringotts auditors wore to ministry proceedings. He acknowledged Harry with a nod and nothing else. That was enough. Dumbledore arrived last. He came in through the senior members' entrance, which was a door at the chamber level, not the gallery, and he moved through the room with the ease of a man who considered this space entirely natural to him. Several members turned to greet him. He touched hands, exchanged words, smiled at a joke someone made near the Hufflepuff heavy section of the bench. He was magnificent at it, the warmth, the presence, the sense he carried of being entirely delighted to be here among these people, his people. Then he looked up at the gallery. His eyes found Harry with the unerring accuracy of someone who had been thinking about exactly where Harry would be. Harry looked back at him. He did not smile this time. He just looked, level and patient, and watched Dumbledore recompose his expression with the speed of long practice and take his seat. He looked rattled, Hermione murmured. Good, Harry said quietly. Amelia Bones was already at the floor, a solidly built woman with a monocle and the manner of someone who had walked into a great many rooms full of people who underestimated her and had long since stopped caring about the walk. She had a file under one arm and the expression of someone who'd been waiting to do this for years and was being very controlled about how much satisfaction she was allowing herself. The chief warlock called the session to order. The formal language washed over Harry in waves. In the matter of the Potter estate, right of estate review as filed, pursuant to the Goblin Accord of 1752, and he tracked the important parts while Hermione tracked everything else and made notations at speed. Dumbledore's representative, a wizard named Aldrich Pruitt, smooth and grey-templed, stood and stated that Dumbledore fully cooperated with any review and had always acted in the best interests of the Potter heir. Bones stood and presented, in 4 precise sentences, the audit findings. She did not editorialize. She stated the numbers. She stated the authorization signatures. She stated the dates. The chamber went very quiet. Not the silence of shock, more the silence of a room full of experienced political operators suddenly doing rapid calculations about which way to move. The estate accounts, Bones said, in her flat and carrying voice, were accessed 237 times over a period of 10 years. Every single access was authorized by the same signature. No counter-signature from any co-executor, guardian, or ministry oversight officer was ever obtained. She held up the ledger, Ragnarok's ledger, formally submitted as evidence. Gringotts attests to the accuracy of this documentation. They invite any member of this body to examine it. Nobody moved to examine it. The members who might have wanted to were watching the members who had reasons not to, and vice versa, and the whole room was doing that thing that rooms full of political people do when something true has been said that everyone wishes wasn't true. Dumbledore sat with perfect composure. His hands were folded. His expression was one of grave, attentive concern, the expression of a man engaged with a serious matter, not of a man on the receiving end of one. Harry watched him and thought, he's going to speak. He was right. 3 minutes later, Dumbledore rose and was recognized by the chief warlock with a deference that was so ingrained it was clearly automatic. "The figures my colleague has presented," Dumbledore said, and his voice was exactly right, measured, neither defensive nor dismissive, deserve thorough examination, and I welcome that examination fully. I would, however, offer context that I believe is essential to understanding the nature of those transactions. He looked around the chamber with the ease of a conductor who knew his orchestra. In the immediate aftermath of the war, with Voldemort defeated and the wizarding world in profound disarray, the question of young Harry Potter's protection was not merely personal. It was strategic. The decisions made regarding the management of his estate were made under wartime conditions, with incomplete legal infrastructure and immediate threat assessments that would not be visible in a financial ledger. The chamber shifted. Not toward him, not entirely, but the quality of the silence changed. "He's reframing it," Hermione said very quietly, writing fast. "He's turning an accounting crime into a wartime decision. Watch, he's going to invoke Voldemort in about 20 seconds. 15 seconds later, Dumbledore said, with Voldemort's followers still at large, with Death Eaters unprosecuted and active, a visible Potter heir with publicly known assets would have been a target of the highest order." "Called it," Hermione muttered. "The measures I took," Dumbledore continued, "were protective in intent and executed with the full awareness that they were extraordinary measures for extraordinary times. I made errors in procedure. I acknowledge that freely. But the intent, said Amelia Bones, who had not been recognized to speak but said it anyway with the confidence of someone who knew the chief warlock wouldn't interrupt her, does not reappear in the vault." Scattered laughter. Brief and quickly controlled, but real. Dumbledore absorbed it with grace. He even permitted himself a small smile, the kind that said fair point, worthy adversary, which was its own kind of political skill, the ability to be charming when being criticized, which made the criticism feel like sport rather than indictment. Harry looked at the members around the chamber. He was watching for the ones whose faces showed something other than political calculation, the ones whose expressions had something personal in them. He found two. The first was a witch near the top tier, older, who was watching Dumbledore with an expression that had curdled. That was someone who believed in him and was in the process of updating their position. The second was Lucius Malfoy, seated in the lower tier, whose expression was perfectly composed and whose stillness was the very specific stillness of someone trying to ensure that nothing he was thinking was visible. Malfoy wanted something specific from this proceeding, Harry noted, and it wasn't necessarily the same thing as protecting Dumbledore. The session ended 40 minutes later with the review formally underway, a date set for full proceedings, and a subcommittee established to examine the audit findings in detail. Bones caught Harry's eye from the floor as the members began to file out and gave him a single nod. Harry stood, straightened his robes, and looked down at Dumbledore one more time. The old man was speaking with Pruitt, head bent slightly, and for just a moment, just the fraction of a second before he controlled it, he looked tired. Good, Harry thought again. And meant it with considerably more weight this time. The carriage back to Hogsmeade gave him time to think, and Hermione gave him her notes before they'd cleared the ministry atrium, which meant he had something to read while he thought. She'd flagged 3 members by name as likely Dumbledore allies who'd attempted to interrupt Bones's presentation on procedural grounds. She'd circled Lucius Malfoy's name with a question mark and written "What does he want?" in the margin. She'd also written, at the bottom of the page, "Dumbledore's argument will land with the older members." They were there. They remember the fear. We need to give them something that cuts through the nostalgia. Harry read that last note twice. She was right. That was the problem, not the evidence. The evidence was clear. The problem was that for a significant portion of the Wizengamot, Albus Dumbledore was not a man who had stolen from a child. He was the man who'd ended the war. Those were not equal weights in people's minds, and no legal argument was going to change that directly. They needed something that shifted the emotional framework. Not away from Dumbledore's service to the wizarding world, that was real and wasn't worth disputing, but toward Harry's parents as real people. Real people who'd had plans, intentions, a life that had been disrupted by more than just Voldemort. He knew what it was. He'd known since the vault. He just needed to decide whether he was ready. Ron was waiting in the common room when Harry got back, which was either coincidence or guilt, and when Harry looked at his face it was clearly the latter. He was sitting in the chair nearest the portrait hole, wizard chessboard in front of him, clearly not playing and clearly trying to look like he had been. "How was it?" Ron asked, aiming for casual. "Productive," Harry said, dropping into the chair across from him. Ron moved a pawn. "It went without conviction." "My mum wrote me," he said, not looking up. Harry waited. She said she heard the review had been filed and she wanted me to know that whatever I might hear, Dumbledore was a good man who'd done the right thing." Ron's jaw tightened slightly. "She said the Potter accounts had been managed very carefully and any issues were just paperwork things." He pushed the chess piece so hard it stumbled. "She said not to let it affect my friendship with you." "She's worried," Harry said. "She should be worried." Ron looked up, and his face was doing something complicated, the particular look of someone whose family loyalty and personal honesty were in direct conflict and neither was winning cleanly. "Harry, I'm not," he stopped. "My family has money. Not much, but we didn't used to be this okay. After the war we struggled. Everyone did, my dad says, but then it got better for us and," he stopped again. "You think some of it came from my accounts," Harry said. Ron looked sick. "I don't know that. But you think it." "I think my mum thought it was, that she didn't know it was, that Dumbledore told her it was fine and she believed him because she always." He pushed the whole chessboard aside with a flat, controlled motion that suggested it had been offending him for a while. "Mum thinks Dumbledore's word is basically the same as Merlin coming down from the sky. Always has." Harry looked at him carefully. Ron was angry, not at Harry, not quite at Dumbledore, but at the position, at being caught between things he couldn't fix with effort or good intentions. "I'm not coming after your family," Harry said. "That's not what this is." "I know that." Ron met his eyes. "But you're coming after Dumbledore, and in my house those are basically the same thing." "They don't have to be." "You don't know my mum." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ron. Did Dumbledore go to your parents and say, 'I'm managing Harry Potter's money and I'd like to give some to you because you helped fight the war'?" Ron's mouth opened, then closed. He thought about it honestly, which Harry had already come to understand was one of Ron's most genuine qualities. He wasn't good at dishonesty, even strategic dishonesty. "No," he said slowly. He'd never have said it like that. He would have, he frowned. He would have been generous. He would have framed it as something your parents would have wanted. Something to help the people who'd sacrificed. And your parents would have believed him. Because he's brilliant at being believed," Harry said. Not harshly. I'm not saying your parents were stupid or greedy. I'm saying Dumbledore is very good at making people feel like they're doing the right thing when they're doing what he wants. He held Ron's gaze. That's what makes him dangerous. Not that he's evil. That he's convincing. Ron sat with that for a long time. The fire crackled. Someone's exploding snap game went off with a bang in the corner and several second years swore. What do you need from me? Ron asked finally. It was the right question. Harry hadn't expected it quite so directly, and for a moment he just looked at Ron Weasley, freckled, uncomfortable, sitting with his hands on his knees like he was bracing for something, and thought that whatever Ron's family situation was, this was a person choosing honesty over comfort in real time, which was not nothing. Nothing right now, Harry said. Just be honest with me when you can. That's all. Ron nodded. He pulled the chessboard back, reset the pieces, and said, gruffly, "Do you want a game?" Yes, Harry said. I should warn you, I'm terrible. Good, Ron said, with the first uncomplicated smile of the conversation. I need a win. 2 weeks later, Harry stood in front of the full Wizengamot review session and read his mother's letter aloud. It had been Bones's idea. Initially, she'd suggested entering Lily Potter's letter as a formal document, a piece of evidence demonstrating the deceased's awareness of the situation. Harry had countered with something better. He would read it himself, in session, as the representative of the Potter estate, which was his legal right as Lord of the House. Dumbledore's side had objected. Pruitt had filed 3 separate procedural challenges in the week leading up to the session. Each one had been answered by Bones with the particular efficiency of someone who'd been ready for all of them. The chamber was fuller than the preliminary session had been. Word had moved the way word moved in political circles, not publicly, not through the papers yet, but through the particular network of people who needed to know things before they became public. The gallery was full. Harry recognized, in the lower sections, the faces of several journalists. He stood at the floor-level podium, which was sized for adults, and which meant that at 5 feet nothing he was looking at a room full of people who were looking back at him with a range of expressions running from sympathy through skepticism through calculation. A few of them were already moved before he'd said a word. The sight of an 11-year-old standing at a ministry podium in formal robes that were very slightly too long for him had done something to the room's emotional temperature that no amount of legal argument could have achieved. Harry didn't lean into it. He stood straight and spoke clearly and read his mother's letter in a voice that didn't waver once, which was harder than he'd expected, not because he was afraid but because hearing his mother's voice in his own voice was a strange and specific kind of difficult that he hadn't anticipated. He read it all. Every word. When he got to "I have watched him look at you, you are 15 months old and you have never done a single remarkable thing except exist and eat and occasionally levitate your own spoon," there was a sound in the chamber. Not laughter exactly, something softer, something that was laughter and grief mixed into one involuntary exhalation. He read to the end. He folded the letter. He looked up. "My mother wrote that the night before she died," he said. "I didn't read it until August. I didn't know it existed until Gringotts recovered it from my legacy vault." He kept his voice level. "I didn't know my legacy vault existed. I didn't know my parents' actual will existed. I didn't know my godfather was alive in Azkaban without a trial. I didn't know my family had a Wizengamot seat, or properties, or a history beyond the 2 paragraphs in a textbook about the night my parents were killed." The chamber was completely still. "I'm not here to destroy Albus Dumbledore," Harry said. "He has done things that matter. My mother said he was a great man. I believe her." He looked at Dumbledore directly, who was sitting at his bench position with an expression Harry had never seen on him before, stripped, the way things are stripped when something true has been said in front of witnesses and there's nowhere left to redirect the room's attention. "But my mother also said great men can be wrong. And the question in front of this body isn't whether Dumbledore is a great man. It's whether any man, great or otherwise, gets to decide what a child inherits, what a child knows, and what a child is allowed to become." He gathered his parchment. My parents left me specific instructions. They left a will. They left letters. They left a vault full of everything they were. He looked around the chamber one final time. 10 years later, I got to read my mother's handwriting for the first time. I'd like the people who made that the case to answer for it. He walked back to the gallery. The sound that came from the chamber behind him was not applause, it was the sound of a room full of people all beginning to talk at once, which was its own kind of verdict. Hermione was rigid with the effort of not grabbing his arm the moment he sat down. That was, "Don't," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything effusive. You were going to say it was brilliant." "I was going to say it was effective," she said primly. Strategically, the personal appeal combined with the precedent framework, he let her analyze it because it was what she needed to do with the feeling, and because she wasn't wrong, and because it gave him something to listen to while the thing in his chest settled. He looked at Dumbledore. The old man had not moved from his bench. He was sitting very still, and his hands, which Harry had previously noted were always in motion, gesturing, folding, steepling, performing the physicality of thought, were perfectly, absolutely still. He was, Harry realized, holding himself together. And for one moment, just one, Harry felt something that wasn't satisfaction. Something more complicated. Something that acknowledged that Dumbledore's stillness was the stillness of someone who had just heard a dead woman's voice tell a full chamber of wizards the specific shape of his blind spot, and who was, underneath whatever composed response he was preparing, genuinely hurt by it. Then Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs and filed the complication away. The papers got it by the next morning. The Daily Prophet, Boy Who Lived Brings Estate Case to Wisengamot, Dumbledore Faces Review. Harry read it over breakfast and thought it was about 80% accurate, which was better than he'd expected. Rita Skeeter had written a sidebar piece that was considerably less accurate, very dramatic, and which described Harry as, looking every inch the tragic young lord come to claim his birthright, in a way that made Hermione make a noise of profound professional disgust. "She's not writing about the actual legal argument at all," Hermione said, furious. "There are pages of evidence and she's described your robes." "My robes were nice," Harry said. "That's not the point is that people read the sidebar," Harry said. "The legal argument is in the main article. The sidebar is what moves people who don't care about legal arguments." He turned the page. "Who's Skeeter going to follow up with? She'll want a reaction piece. Dumbledore won't give her one. He never speaks to the press when he's losing. Malfoy might." They both looked at the Slytherin table, where Draco Malfoy was in quiet but animated conversation with two of his housemates and studiously not looking over at Gryffindor. "He's been strange all week," Hermione said. "His father's playing both sides," Harry said. "Lucius Malfoy doesn't want Dumbledore destroyed, he wants him weakened. There's a difference." He folded the newspaper. "A weakened Dumbledore is useful to the Malfoys. A destroyed one means the whole power structure shifts and they'd have to pick a new center to orbit. They're not ready for that." Hermione looked at him with an expression she deployed occasionally when he said something that surprised her. Not often, it was specific to moments when he was being more strategically precise than she'd expected, which happened more often than she'd initially calculated. She'd stopped trying to hide the expression and now just let it be what it was. "You figured all that out from watching him at the preliminary hearing?" she asked. "My mum was apparently very good at reading people," Harry said. "I think she passed it on." Hermione's expression went quiet for a moment. Then she turned back to her breakfast and said, "Practically, we should write to Bones about Malfoy's likely move. If he goes to the press with a framing that protects Dumbledore while positioning him as, already written it," Harry said. "Sent it with the Goblin post this morning." She looked at him over her pumpkin juice. He looked back at her. She made a sound that was 3% exasperation and 97% the closest she got to laughing. Neville found him in the corridor outside herbology that afternoon. Neville Longbottom was the quietest presence in Gryffindor Tower, which Harry had come to understand was not the same as being the least observant. Neville noticed things. He just processed them internally and at length before doing anything with them. Harry, Neville said, and then seemed to need a moment to continue. I heard about in the Wizengamot. What you said about your godfather. About trials. He was gripping his herbology gloves. My parents, he said, then stopped. Harry waited. My parents didn't get trials either, Neville said. The people who, what happened to them? They went to Azkaban, but only because Dumbledore, there was a trial eventually, because Dumbledore pushed for it. Years later. He was looking at the floor. I was always taught to be grateful for that. That he got justice for my parents. His head came up slowly. But my gran said once, only once, she didn't mean for me to hear it, she said there should have been a trial immediately. That the delay was, he stopped. I don't know what I'm saying. You're saying the pattern is bigger than just my family, Harry said quietly. Neville looked at him. I thought you should know. I'm glad you told me. Harry meant it. He put a hand briefly on Neville's shoulder. If your grandmother would be willing to speak to Amelia Bones, I can ask. Don't push if she's not ready. But if she is. He held Neville's gaze. My case is about my family. But you're right that the pattern's bigger. If there are other families, there might be others, Neville said. His voice had something new in it, not quite confidence, but the precursor to it. People who lost things they were told were being taken care of. Harry nodded. Neville, he said. Thank you. Seriously. Neville went slightly pink and looked at his herbology gloves and said, right, well, Professor Sprout will be waiting, and essentially fled down the corridor, but his back was straighter as he went. By the end of October, the subcommittee had expanded its investigation. Bones had formally subpoenaed 3 additional sets of accounts, 2 Order of the Phoenix financial records and 1 set of transactions going through a Hogwarts discretionary fund, and the Sirius Black petition had been accepted for formal review by the Office of Magical Law. Dumbledore had been called to give formal testimony before the subcommittee. He'd gone. He'd been composed and articulate and had mounted the most sophisticated possible defense of his decisions, which was, I was the only one positioned to protect the wizarding world's most important asset during its most vulnerable period, and I made the best decisions I could with the information and authority I had. The subcommittee had listened. They'd also read the ledgers. Both things were true simultaneously, which was the problem, not that Dumbledore was lying, but that his version of events and the ledger's version of events could both be completely accurate and still not add up to anything like innocence. Bones sent Harry a summary of the testimony with her notes in the margins. One note, next to a paragraph where Dumbledore had described his intentions toward Harry's upbringing, simply read, he believes every word. That's what makes this so difficult. Harry read the note twice. He thought about Dumbledore's still hands in the chamber. He thought about his mother writing great men can be wrong at midnight while Voldemort was coming. He wrote back to Bones, what does the Wizengamot do when the person who stole from you genuinely thought you'd be better off without it? Her reply came the following morning, it holds them accountable anyway. That's what law is for. Harry folded the letter and put it in the satchel with the others, next to his mother's letter, next to the key with the Potter crest, and he went to breakfast. Outside, October was going gold and orange over the lake, the way it did before November came and took all the color out of the world. The giant squid was visible from the window, a vague dark movement under the surface, unbothered by everything happening above it. Harry watched it for a moment. Then he picked up his bag and walked into the day, and did not look back. Chapter 4, The Stone and the Shadow. November arrived like a door slamming shut. The warmth went out of the grounds overnight, frost silvering the grass by morning, the lake going dark and still. The corridors of Hogwarts shifted their drafts to something colder and more purposeful, and the staircases seemed to move more often, as if the castle was rearranging itself for whatever the season was going to require. Harry noticed all of it in the peripheral way he noticed most things, as information, filed and available, not dwelt upon. What occupied the front of his mind in the first week of November was not the weather. It was the third floor. He'd first noticed it in September, the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit, a door on the third floor corridor that sat differently than the others, that had a quality of intention about it that the other doors didn't. Hogwarts was full of locked doors, that wasn't unusual. But this one had a reason for being locked in a way that pressed against the back of his awareness like a sound just below hearing. Dumbledore had announced at the start of term feast that the third floor corridor was forbidden to anyone who didn't want to die a painful death. He'd said it with his usual warm whimsy, which most students interpreted as dramatic school rules. Harry had interpreted it as, there is something in there that Dumbledore put there on purpose. And given everything he now knew about what Dumbledore put places on purpose, he thought that was worth understanding. He wasn't going to charge in. That was not how he did things. He started the way he started everything, with Hermione in the library, asking the right questions sideways. "What's the most valuable thing in the British wizarding world that isn't a person?" he asked, sitting across from her with a charms essay he wasn't working on. Hermione looked up from her transfiguration notes. "That's an extremely broad question. Narrow it. Something that's been in the news recently. Something someone might want to steal or protect." She looked at him over the top of her notes with the expression that meant she was already 3 steps ahead and had been waiting for him to catch up. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said. Harry waited. "Nicholas Flamel," she said. "Alchemist. He's the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, which produces the elixir of life. It can effectively extend life indefinitely. He's been alive for 600 years. She set down her quill. "There was a break-in at Gringotts in July. Before term started. Vault 713 was broken into. The papers said the vault was empty by the time the thieves got there." Harry was very still. "Which vault?" 713. Hagrid had taken him to Gringotts in August. Vault 713, a high-security vault accessed differently from the others. Hagrid had retrieved a small grubby package and said it was Hogwarts business and Harry hadn't pushed. He'd filed it. And then the whole estate revelation had swept everything else into the background. "Someone tried to steal the stone from Gringotts," Harry said. "Then it got moved. Moved here. That's a significant leap. Is it?" He looked at her steadily. "Dumbledore has something on the third floor that he's willing to threaten students about. The stone gets moved from Gringotts, the most secure magical facility in Britain, to a school because Dumbledore decides it's safer here. What's protecting it? I don't know. Let's find out." She picked her quill back up, not to write but to think with, tapping it against her notebook. "Why does it matter to you specifically?" "It's valuable, it's being protected, presumably Dumbledore, Hermione." He said her name with a specific weight. "Someone tried to steal it once already. Someone tried and failed at Gringotts. Which means they're going to try again somewhere else." He held her gaze. "And the only person who tried to steal from me once already and thought that was fine is currently the one who decided to bring the most valuable magical object in the world to a school full of children." She went very still. "You think Dumbledore knows someone will try again?" "I think Dumbledore set a trap," Harry said. "And I think the trap is in a school. And I think that's the part nobody's supposed to notice." The library was quiet around them. Madame Pants was reshelving something at the far end with the focused displeasure she brought to all reshelving. A group of Ravenclaws at the next table were deep in an argument about transfiguration theory that had been going on for 20 minutes. Hermione opened a fresh page in her notebook and wrote, "Philosopher's Stone, what's protecting it?" Then she said, in the tone she used when she'd committed to something, "I'll start with the library's restricted section index. The protections on something that valuable would require specialist magic. Flamel's name will be somewhere. Don't get caught in the restricted section." "I wasn't going to use the restricted section," she said, with mild offense. "I was going to deduce the protections from existing academic literature on high-security enchantments and work backwards from there." She paused. "The restricted section is my backup plan." Harry almost smiled. What would I do without you? Make fewer notes and reach conclusions faster but with less supporting evidence, she said, already writing. Quidditch had happened in the meantime. Harry had, on Ron's advice, shown up to the Gryffindor tryouts and flown on a school broom for the first time in his life. It had been immediate. The way some things are immediate, not learned but recognized, like his hands already knew what to do and his body understood the air in a way it didn't understand the ground. He'd caught the practice snitch in 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was apparently a record of some kind, and Oliver would have looked at him with the expression of a man who'd received a gift he hadn't thought to ask for. McGonagall had come to the tryout field personally, which Harry thought was either a good sign or a sign that she'd been watching the Wisengamot proceedings closely and had opinions about his general existence. She'd watched him fly for 10 minutes, said nothing, and then told Wood to get him a proper broom. The Nimbus 2000 had arrived 3 days later by post, which caused a small sensation at the Gryffindor table and a conversation among the first years that Harry had mostly stayed out of. What he hadn't stayed out of was Draco Malfoy's reaction. Malfoy had watched the broom's arrival at breakfast with the look of someone recalculating rapidly, and then had made a comment about special treatment that was aimed at Harry but phrased for an audience. Harry had looked at him across the hall and said, clearly enough to be heard without shouting, "You could have tried out too." Several people had laughed. Malfoy had gone red in a way that suggested the laughter was more damaging than the comment. His 2 associates, Crabbe and Goyle, who followed him with the unquestioning devotion of furniture, looked at him for instruction. Malfoy had looked back at Harry with something that was recalibrating in real time. Later that day, Malfoy had found him alone near the Transfiguration corridor and said, without the audience and without the posturing, "My father wrote me." "I know," Harry said. Malfoy blinked. "What do you mean you know?" "He wrote you the day the prophet ran the story. I saw your face at breakfast." Harry looked at him calmly. "What did he say?" Malfoy stood with the slightly wrong-footed look of someone who prepared for an ambush and found a conversation instead. "He said to watch which way things were going and not to commit to any position publicly." He paused. "He said Dumbledore was a useful ally who was becoming a liability." "Your father's right," Harry said. Malfoy stared at him. "You're agreeing with my father." "About that one thing, yes." He looked at Malfoy steadily. "The Malfoy family has a Wisengamot seat. Multiple, actually. If the balance of that chamber shifts, and it's shifting, families that move early get better positions than families that move late." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be my friend, Draco. I'm pointing out that you're standing at a fork." Malfoy's expression went through several changes in quick succession. The performance of aristocratic indifference was the last one, which meant it was the least true. "You talk like you're 40, he said. "I've had a complicated summer," Harry said. Malfoy didn't laugh exactly, but something in his face did something that wasn't scowling. He looked at Harry with the measurement of someone actually seeing a person rather than a category for the first time. "The stone," he said, quietly. Harry waited. "I don't know anything specific," Malfoy said, just as quietly, each word chosen carefully. "But there are conversations my father has that I'm not supposed to overhear." He glanced down the corridor. "Someone has been looking for something valuable. Someone who my father finds both useful and frightening. He doesn't find many people frightening." Harry didn't react visibly. "When did he start being frightened?" "Summer. Before term. Around July." Malfoy met his eyes. "That's all I know. July. The Gringotts break in." "Thank you," Harry said. Malfoy looked like he'd handed something over that he wasn't certain he'd meant to give. He straightened his robes, recomposed his expression, and said, more loudly, as a Hufflepuff rounded the corner, "Potter." Then he walked away. Harry watched him go and thought, Lucius Malfoy is frightened of whoever tried to steal the stone. And whatever frightens Lucius Malfoy is not small. He told Hermione that evening. He told Ron the following morning, after extracting a promise of confidentiality that Ron gave with the seriousness of someone who understood the stakes. Ron said, "So there's something on the third floor. Something, someone wants. And Dumbledore brought it here knowing that." "As a trap," Harry said. "What kind of person walks into a trap at Hogwarts?" "Someone who's desperate," Hermione said from behind her notebook. "Or someone who thinks they can handle whatever's protecting it." She looked up. "Or someone who's already inside." Both Harry and Ron looked at her. "The break-in at Gringotts was July 31st, she said. "The same day Harry first visited. Whoever broke in was there the same day the package was removed." She tapped her notebook. "That's too coincidental. Whoever it was knew the package was being moved. Which means they had information about Dumbledore's plans." She paused. "Which means they have a way of watching Dumbledore's movements. Which means, they're here," Harry said. "Quiet. Quirrell," Ron said suddenly. They both looked at him. Ron had the expression of someone who'd said a thing he'd been sitting with for a while and wasn't sure about, but, he went weird over the summer. "My brother said. He went somewhere and came back wrong. And he's the defense teacher. If you were trying to get into the third floor and you needed to know what was protecting whatever's in there, you'd want to be a professor, wouldn't you? You'd want to be able to move around the castle at night." Harry was thinking about the first defense lesson. Quirrell trembling at a dropped book. Quirrell who could barely manage a classroom. He was thinking about the turban. "He's not acting," Harry said slowly. "He genuinely is frightened. But he's not frightened of us. He's frightened of," he stopped. "Of what's controlling him," Hermione said, and her voice had gone very careful. "Or who?" They sat with that. "Voldemort," Ron said, and then looked slightly surprised at himself for saying it without flinching. "Has to be, doesn't it?" Harry thought about his scar. He thought about the fact that nobody had ever satisfactorily explained to him how a baby survived the killing curse, and the way Hagrid had deflected the question, and the way Dumbledore's explanation in Diagon Alley that first day had been warm and vague and had answered the surface of the question while leaving the substance completely untouched. He thought about his mother's research. The documents taken from his vault. Advanced work in sacrificial and blood magic. "If Voldemort needs the stone," Harry said, "it's because he needs a body. The elixir of life could restore one." He looked at his hands on the table. "He's not dead. He's something that needs to become alive again." "That's," Hermione stopped herself from saying theoretical because her expression suggested she knew it wasn't. "That's why Dumbledore brought it here," she said. "He knew Voldemort would come after it. He wants to contain the attempt." "At a school," Ron said flatly. "While being investigated for financial crimes and politically weakened," Harry added. He looked up. "If Voldemort gets the stone, he comes back. If Dumbledore catches him trying, he re-establishes himself as the only person who can handle the threat." He held their eyes, one then the other. Either way, Dumbledore needs the crisis. The common room was noisy around them. Second years were playing Exploding Snap in the corner. The fire was bright. It looked like a perfectly ordinary evening at Hogwarts, and underneath it something was moving that Harry had been tracking since August, and it was moving faster now. "We need to know what's protecting the stone," he said. "Specifically. All of it." "I'll have it by the end of the week," Hermione said, with a certainty that allowed no argument. She had it in 4 days. She laid it out on the table in the library corner that had become their unofficial war room, a table near a window overlooking the vegetable garden, remote enough from other students to be private without being conspicuous. 7 layers, she said. "I worked it out from the personnel. Each professor who works closely with Dumbledore contributed one. Fluffy, that's the 3-headed dog, is Hagrid's. Then Devil's Snare. Then Enchanted Keys. Then a life-size chessboard. Then something involving a troll, almost certainly. Then a potions puzzle. She looked at her notes. And then whatever is at the end. The final chamber. The mirror, Harry said. They both looked at him. There's a mirror in the castle, he said. He'd felt it, the way he occasionally felt things in the castle, not precisely magic but the pressure of something with significant purpose. I haven't found it yet. But it's here. And Dumbledore put it somewhere specific for a reason. He thought about it. Something that shows you what you want most. If you used it to hide the stone, only someone who wanted the stone but didn't want to use it could retrieve it. Hermione looked at him. How do you know about the mirror? I don't, completely. But it fits. He looked at the list. Dumbledore designed all of this for one scenario. He wanted it broken through layer by layer, and he wanted the person breaking through it to feel like they were winning, and then he wanted the last layer to stop them. He paused. It's elegant, actually. It's designed for Voldemort, Hermione said. Someone who wants the stone desperately, for personal use. Which means it's not designed for us, Harry said. We're not trying to take the stone. We're trying to ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands before Dumbledore's trap can spring. He looked at his hands. But we don't know Dumbledore's timeline. We don't know when Quirrell makes his move. We watch Quirrell, Ron said. We watch Quirrell, Harry agreed. Shifts. One of us, whenever possible, notes his movements. Where he goes at night, which corridors, whether he's spending time near the third floor. We need a week of data before we do anything else. And in the meantime? Hermione asked. Harry looked at the list of protections. In the meantime, we learn to get through them. Not to take the stone. To be able to get through them, if we have to. So that if Quirrell moves before we're ready, we're not starting from nothing. Ron absorbed this. You want to practice breaking into the most protected room in Hogwarts. I want to be prepared, Harry said. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, Harry and Hermione said simultaneously, then looked at each other. Fine, Ron said, pulling the list toward him and examining the chessboard entry with the expression of a man discovering a professional obligation he was actually excited about. I can handle that one. The first week of November produced two significant things. The first was that Sirius Black's case was formally accepted for review by the Office of Magical Law. A hearing date was set for December. Ragnarok sent notification via Goblin Post, and Harry sat with it for a long moment before writing back, do everything possible to expedite. Whatever it costs. The second was that Quirrell went to the third floor on a Wednesday night. Ron had been the one watching, not obviously, just happening to be in the right corridor at the right time because Harry had triangulated Quirrell's most common late-night routes from 2 weeks of observation. Ron had pressed himself into a doorway and watched Quirrell pause in front of the third-floor corridor entrance, stand there for nearly 10 minutes doing nothing but standing and breathing, and then turn around and go back. He's not ready, Harry said, when Ron reported it. Or he's being held back. Held back by what? Whoever's driving him, Harry said. He doesn't get to make the decision. Someone else decides when. Voldemort, Hermione said, in the flat tone she used for things she wished were theoretical. If what's left of Voldemort is sharing Quirrell's body, Harry said, it might not be able to push too hard without burning through him. He needs Quirrell functional long enough to get the stone. He paused. Which means there's a timing constraint. He won't wait forever. So we have a window, Hermione said. We have a window, Harry confirmed. He looked at the map they'd made, a rough sketch of the castle's relevant corridors, Quirrell's observed routes, the third-floor entrance, the known staff patrol patterns. He thought about Dumbledore, who presumably had his own map, his own surveillance, his own awareness of what was coming and when. He thought about the fact that a politically weakened Dumbledore, currently defending his decisions before the Wisingamat while managing a school, running an organization, and maintaining the public image of wizarding Britain's greatest wizard, had an enormous number of demands on his attention. He thought about whether the trap would spring perfectly if nobody checked it. "We should go in," Harry said. Hermione and Ron both went still. "Not now. Not tonight. But we should go in and verify each layer. Make sure it's intact. Make sure nothing's been compromised." He looked at them. "Quirrell's been casing it for weeks. He might have already moved against one of the protections. If Dumbledore's trap has a hole in it and nobody knows, nobody except us," Hermione said. "Nobody except us." Another silence. Then Ron said, "When?" "Give me 3 days," Harry said. "I need to get something from my vault first." What Harry needed from his vault was a communication device, a small silver disc that had been among his father's aura equipment, a field communication tool that allowed real-time messaging between two paired discs without owl or fire. James Potter's aura kit had been in the legacy vault, and the kit was comprehensive. Harry had taken the discs in October, not knowing exactly when he'd need them, just knowing they were the kind of thing worth having. He sent a message to Ragnarok. Not about the stone, that was too significant to put in a quick note, but about something he'd been working up to for 2 weeks. The anonymous tip that triggered the audit in August. "Do you know who sent it?" The reply came by Goblin post that afternoon. "We do not reveal our sources. However, I will tell you this, the tip came from inside the ministry. And it came from someone who had been looking for grounds to investigate for years and required only the right moment. You may form your own conclusions." Ragnarok. Harry read it twice. He thought about Amelia Bones, who had told him she'd been looking for grounds to examine certain decisions for the better part of a decade. He thought about the timing, the tip arriving just before Harry was due to start Hogwarts, just when Dumbledore's access to the Potter accounts would be visible in a new way. Someone had decided the right moment was now. Before Harry arrived at Hogwarts knowing nothing. Before another year disappeared into managed ignorance. He owed someone a debt he couldn't yet name. He filed it alongside everything else, the things he knew, the things he suspected, the things he was still building toward, and he went to defense against the dark arts. Quirrell was teaching them about jinx deflection, which he did with his usual jittery incompetence. He knocked over his notes. He startled when Seamus Finnegan's wand slipped. He stood at the front of the classroom in his turban and his stutter and his visible discomfort with everything, and Harry sat in the third row and watched him. Quirrell was a tragedy too, Harry thought. A different kind than Dumbledore's, less grandiose, more human. Whatever he'd been before the summer, before whatever had happened in the Black Forest, he was gone now. What was using his body didn't care much about him. That was what made Voldemort different from Dumbledore, Harry thought. Not the magic. Not even the violence. Dumbledore had used Harry as a means to an end while genuinely caring about him in some real way. Voldemort was using Quirrell as a vehicle and felt nothing about it at all. Both of them made their choices about other people's lives without permission. The difference was one of degree and feeling, not of fundamental structure. He wrote that thought in the margin of his defense notes. Hermione, sitting beside him, leaned over and read it, and for a moment said nothing. Then she wrote underneath it, "That's the most important thing you've written all year." He looked at it. He looked at Quirrell fumbling with his notes at the front of the room. He looked at what was coming. 3 days, he thought. Then they'd go in, check the protections, verify the trap. And then they'd be ready for whenever Quirrell stopped casing the door and actually walked through it. He was not afraid of what was on the other side. That was important. He'd been made to be afraid of so many things over his life, Dudley's fists, Vernon's voice, the smallness of the cupboard, the particular terror of wanting something and knowing it wouldn't come, and none of it had made him small, it had just made him patient. Patient and extremely, carefully, thorough. The bell rang. Quirrell flinched at it. Harry packed his bag, stood up, and walked out into the corridor where the cold November light was coming through the windows at a low angle, throwing long shadows down the stone floor. Hermione fell into step beside him. Ron appeared from the back of the group, already complaining about the lesson. "He didn't teach us anything," Ron said. "Again. We've been in that class for 2 months and I couldn't defend myself against a strongly worded letter." "I'll teach you some things," Harry said. "When?" "Thursday evenings. We've got the room before the astronomy club takes it." He glanced at Ron. "You too, Neville. He mentioned it to me this morning. He could use it." "Defense lessons," Hermione said. "Unofficial." "Useful," Harry said. "Given what's coming." Hermione didn't argue. Ron said, "Yeah, all right," with the ease of someone whose entire approach to problems was to be useful against them. They walked down the corridor together, 3 11-year-olds with a map of the most dangerous room in the school in Harry's bag, a goblin bank behind them, a legal case moving through the Wizengamot, a trapped Dark Lord on the 3rd floor, and approximately 3 days before Harry Potter decided enough observation had been done and it was time to look the thing in the eye. The castle shifted a staircase somewhere above them with a sound like breathing. November pressed its cold against the windows. Harry walked faster. Chapter 5, Fire and Reckoning. The Wizengamot delivered its preliminary findings on a Thursday. Harry was in transfiguration when the goblin post arrived, the compact grey bird landing on the windowsill with the punctuality of something that had never once been late, dropping a sealed envelope onto his desk and departing before McGonagall could decide whether to confiscate it. The class went briefly, collectively silent. McGonagall looked at the envelope, looked at Harry, and said, "Read it after class, Mr. Potter." "Yes, Professor," Harry said, and put it in his bag, and spent the next 40 minutes turning a matchstick into a needle with complete outward composure while the envelope sat against his ribs like something with a heartbeat. He read it in the corridor, Hermione and Ron flanking him. Bones had written it herself rather than sending the formal summary, which told him the formal summary required personal context. "Lord Potter, the subcommittee has delivered its preliminary findings to the full Wizengamot. In summary, the financial irregularities are confirmed, the documentation is unimpeachable, and the committee has recommended formal censure of Albus Dumbledore on 3 counts, unauthorized estate management, breach of executor duty, and misappropriation of funds held in trust." Formal censure, in practical terms, means the following: Dumbledore will be required to make full financial restitution to the Potter estate. We are calculating the precise sum including interest, and it is significant. He will be removed from his position as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, effective immediately upon the full Chamber's ratification of the findings, which is expected within a fortnight. His Order of Merlin remains untouched. There was no appetite to pursue that, and I did not push it. What he keeps, Hogwarts. The vote on whether to pursue his removal as headmaster was 8 to 14 against. He has deep roots in that institution and the members were not willing to go that far. His Order of Phoenix remains a private organization and is outside the Wizengamot's jurisdiction. What this means, he is weakened but not broken. His political authority is substantially reduced. His financial authority over your estate is permanently revoked. His ability to act unilaterally in wizarding governance is curtailed. It is not everything. But it is real, and it is permanent, and it happened in less than 60 days. On the matter of Sirius Black, the hearing is confirmed for December 15th. I have obtained testimony from 3 Aurors who were present at the time of his arrest. There was no trial. There is no record of one. The Ministry's position is increasingly indefensible. Bones. Harry folded the letter. "Chief Warlock," Ron said. "He's losing the Chief Warlock position." "He held it for years," Hermione said, with the voice she used when she was processing something that was both a victory and more complicated than a victory. That's a significant shift in the Wizengamot's balance." "It is," Harry said. "Are you going to meet with him?" Ron asked. Harry had already decided. He'd decided before he finished reading the letter, which meant he'd probably decided before the letter arrived, which meant some part of him had been working toward this meeting since September. "Yes," he said. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. "He might try to," she started. I know what he might try, Harry said. That's why I'm going. He sent the reply through Bones's office rather than directly to Dumbledore, which was a choice about framing. He was not responding to a personal request, he was responding through proper channels, as Lord Potter to Headmaster Dumbledore, at a time and location of Harry's choosing rather than Dumbledore's. They met on Sunday afternoon in an unused classroom on the second floor that Harry had selected specifically because it was not Dumbledore's office. No phoenix. No portraits. No carefully arranged symbols of accumulated wisdom. Just two chairs facing each other in a room that belonged equally to both of them. Dumbledore arrived first, which surprised Harry slightly. He'd expected the old man to be precisely on time, to control the space by being established in it. Instead, Dumbledore was there when Harry arrived, standing by the window, and when Harry came in he turned around and for the first time since September, without an audience, he looked his age. Not physically, he was still tall and sharp-eyed and carried himself with the ease of someone who had operated from a position of authority for so long it had become posture. But something in his face had settled differently. The performance had quieted. Harry sat down. Dumbledore sat. I wanted to speak with you, Dumbledore said, before the full chamber meeting. Before the ratification. I know, Harry said. I wanted to say, Dumbledore paused, and what was unusual about the pause was that it felt genuine rather than strategic. I have been asked by my legal counsel to say very little. They have advised me that any admission here could be used in subsequent proceedings. He looked at Harry steadily. I have decided that there are things more important than my legal position. Harry waited. I was wrong, Dumbledore said. The room was very still. Not about wanting to protect you. That was real. Not about the threat Voldemort represented, that was real as well, and I want you to understand that the fear driving those decisions was not manufactured. He held Harry's gaze. But I made those decisions as though they were mine to make. I looked at your parents' instructions and I set them aside because I believed I knew better. I looked at a child and I saw a weapon the world needed, and I arranged that child's life around that belief. He stopped. That was wrong. Whatever I believed, whatever I feared, it was wrong. Harry said nothing. He was watching Dumbledore's hands, which were folded, still, the same stillness as the Wizengamot chamber. I took things from you that I had no right to take, Dumbledore continued. Not only money. You know that I know it wasn't only money. His voice was quiet and carried no performance in it whatsoever. Your parents were extraordinary people. Your mother especially, she saw things others couldn't, and she saw things about me that I would have been wiser to hear. A pause. She tried, once, to tell me. The summer before she died. I listened politely and I did not change anything. He looked at his hands. I've thought about that conversation a great deal this autumn. Harry sat with all of it for a long moment. He felt the complicated thing in his chest, the thing that wasn't anger, the thing that had been the cold and purposeful engine of everything he'd done since August, and he looked at Dumbledore and said, I know you believe it. Dumbledore looked up. I know you're not performing this, Harry said. I've been watching you for 2 months and I know when you're performing and this isn't it. He held the old man's eyes. And I also know that being genuinely sorry doesn't change any of the facts. It doesn't change the cupboard. It doesn't change not knowing my parents. It doesn't change Sirius sitting in Azkaban for a decade. He said it all without bitterness, just with the flat accuracy of a person stating coordinates. I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It isn't fine. But I'm also not trying to destroy you. I know, Dumbledore said. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else, Harry said. That's different. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again his voice was careful. There are things I should tell you. About Voldemort. About what happened the night your parents died. About you, specifically. He held Harry's gaze. Things I have kept from you that you have a right to know and which are more complex than anything the Wizengamot has examined. Harry looked at him. He thought about his mother's research, the documents taken from the vault, the sacrificial magic. He thought about Quirrell on the third floor at night. He thought about the timeline pressing in from every direction. "Tell me," Harry said. So Dumbledore told him. Harry came out of that classroom 40 minutes later. He stood in the corridor for a moment with the stone wall at his back and let the castle's cold air sit on him. He wasn't aware of having moved to the wall, his body had made that decision while his mind was occupied with everything Dumbledore had said. A Horcrux. The word had no referent in anything Harry had read, but Dumbledore had explained it with the directness of a man who had decided that euphemism was no longer available to him. An object, or a person, containing a fragment of a soul. Voldemort had made them. Multiple. The night he'd come to Godric's Hollow, he had arrived with a soul already in pieces, and when the killing curse had rebounded, something attached itself, Dumbledore had said. To the only living thing in the room. "I believe, and I have believed for years, that you carry a piece of Voldemort's soul. In your scar." Harry had sat with that for a moment. "What does that mean?" he'd asked, "for what I need to do?" And Dumbledore had looked at him with the expression of a man who had been carrying an answer he was not proud of for 10 years and said, "I had believed it meant you would eventually need to die. For him to be fully destroyed." Had believed, Harry had noted. Past tense. "Your mother's research," Dumbledore had said. The documents that were removed from your vault. I read them. I have been reading them for years. And in those documents your mother outlined a theory, incomplete, unpublished, unverified, about the nature of the sacrifice she made for you." He had paused. She believed that a willing sacrifice, given in love, did not merely protect the subject. She believed it created a counter-enchantment powerful enough to destroy anchored soul fragments upon contact. Not just repel them. Destroy them. A longer pause. If she was right, and I have been working from her notes for a decade, then what is in your scar may already be dying. Starved of its anchor by the protection she left in you. The night on the third floor, when Voldemort makes his attempt, may accelerate that process significantly. Harry had looked at him. "You're not certain." "No," Dumbledore had said. "I am not certain. I have been afraid to test the theory and afraid to tell you about it because both paths led to your being in danger." "I'm already in danger," Harry had said. "I would rather be in danger knowing the truth." Dumbledore had closed his eyes. "Yes," he had said. "You would." Harry stood in the corridor now and ran all of it through his mind with the same systematic attention he gave everything. A piece of Voldemort in his scar. His mother's theory. Dumbledore's decade of working from her stolen notes without crediting her, without telling Harry, making decisions based on Harry's mother's unpublished research while Harry sat in a cupboard not knowing his mother had been a researcher. Even the apology had layers. He pushed off the wall and walked toward the library. He needed Hermione. "He told you all of that?" Hermione said. She had stopped writing mid-note, which never happened. "Yes. In one meeting." "He's changed his approach," Harry said. "The Wisengamot decision isn't ratified yet but it's coming and he knows it. He's decided that information is the one thing he can give me that no legal process can force him to provide. He's trying to re-establish your trust," Hermione said. "He's trying to be useful," Harry said. "Which is different. He knows I'm not going to trust him the way he wants me to. But he'd rather be useful to me than irrelevant, and to be useful he has to be honest." He looked at his hands. It's a rational move. I almost respect it." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, the Horcrux theory. "If there's one in your scar, my mother thought it was already being destroyed by her sacrifice." He looked up. "Dumbledore thinks she was right but isn't certain. Then we need to verify her theory. She was already reaching for a different notebook. Her original research, it's still missing from your vault. Dumbledore has been working from it. Does he still have it? He said he'd return everything. Through Gringotts, formally documented. We need to read it ourselves, Hermione said, with a firmness that suggested this was not a request. We're not working from Dumbledore's interpretation of your mother's work. We go to the source. Agreed, Harry said immediately. Ron had been listening with the expression he wore when he was processing things that were larger than expected but refusing to be overwhelmed by them. So Voldemort's not fully dead, he said. He's on the 3rd floor, wearing Quirrell, coming for the stone to get a body back. He paused. And there's a bit of him in Harry's head. Apparently, Harry said. Right. Ron absorbed this. So what do we do? Harry had been thinking about this since he left the classroom. He'd been running the pieces, the Horcrux theory, Quirrell's nocturnal hovering, Dumbledore's trap, the stone, the mirror, his mother's research, and the thing they assembled when arranged correctly was a picture with a very narrow window in it. Dumbledore's trap is designed for Voldemort acting through Quirrell, Harry said. 7 layers. The mirror at the end. Voldemort reaches the mirror, sees himself holding the stone, wants it, and the mirror gives it to the one person who wants it but doesn't want to use it. He paused. But here's the problem. The mirror gives the stone to whoever wants it without wanting to use it. That's not Quirrell and Voldemort. They'll stand in front of it and get nothing, and Dumbledore expects to arrive and clean up. But Dumbledore's been distracted, Hermione said, following. He's been before the Wizengamot for weeks. If Quirrell moves on a night when Dumbledore's attention is divided, the trap springs but nobody's there to close it, Harry said. Voldemort stands in front of the mirror, can't get the stone, and then what? He improvises. He has Quirrell's hands, Quirrell's wand. He can destroy the mirror. He can try other methods. He looked at them. The trap only works if someone is monitoring. And Dumbledore has been spending considerable time not monitoring. Because of us, Hermione said quietly. Because of me, Harry said. I didn't plan that. But it's the situation. Ron exhaled. So we need to be there. We need to be ready, Harry said. Not to fight Voldemort. We can't fight Voldemort. But we can make sure the trap springs correctly. We can make sure someone's there. We go in, Hermione said. Like you said. Tonight. Harry looked at the window. It was late afternoon, the sky doing its November thing of going dark too early, the grounds below already losing detail in the dusk. He thought about the 7 layers. He thought about Hermione's analysis, Ron's chess ability, the things they'd been quietly preparing for 2 weeks. Tonight, he said. They went in at midnight. Not impulsively, Harry had spent 3 weeks preparing for this specific possibility and had done so without announcing it, the way he did things that needed to be ready before they were required. He had the invisibility cloak from his father's kit in the legacy vault, which he'd retrieved weeks ago and mentioned to no one. He had a list of what each protection required and how to counter it. He had Ron, who had spent every Thursday evening since early November playing progressively faster and more complex wizard chess against anyone in Gryffindor who'd face him, until he could read a board in seconds. He had Hermione, who had the potions problem memorized so thoroughly she could solve it blindfolded. What he had not anticipated was Neville. Neville was sitting on the stairs outside the fat lady's portrait when they emerged from the common room at 5 to 12, wrapped in his dressing gown, clearly having been there a while. I knew it, Neville said. He looked nervous but set. I've been watching you lot all week. I know you're going somewhere. Harry looked at him. He thought about Neville's parents. He thought about the pattern Neville had identified, other families, other losses, bigger than just the Potters. He thought about the quiet way Neville had been showing up to Thursday evenings and working harder than anyone in the room without talking about why. Come on then, Harry said. Neville blinked. I thought you'd try to talk me out of it. Why would I do that? Neville looked at Hermione, who shrugged, and Ron, who said, he doesn't do that, mate, and stood up and followed them. 4 of them, then. Harry adjusted the plan in his head as they walked. Neville was good with herbology. Devil's Snare. Harry assigned the role in his mind and moved on. The third-floor corridor was exactly as advertised. The door was locked. Hermione had it open in 15 seconds with a spell Harry hadn't known she'd learned, which she'd apparently sourced from a 6th-year textbook and practiced in secret because she'd suspected this moment was coming. Harry added it to his list of reasons Hermione Granger was alarming in the best possible way. The door opened into sound, the immediate, resonant rumble of 3 large heads all snuffling in sleep consciousness, and into smell, which was significant. Fluffy was enormous. The word dog did not prepare you for this. Dog was a category. Fluffy was an argument. Music, Harry said quietly. He'd known about this from Hagrid's general lack of ability to keep relevant information from people who were listening carefully. He pulled a small charmed music box from his pocket, another piece of his father's Auror kit, which contained a standard enchanted music box designed for exactly this kind of neutralization. He wound it. 3 bars of something soft and rhythmic. The head settled, slowly, like mountains deciding to become landscape again. Go, Harry said. They went through the trapdoor. The drop into blackness. Devil's Snare reached for them immediately, the reflexive embrace of something that responded to the warmth of living things. Harry lit his wand. Neville said, "Relax, don't fight it," in a steady voice and demonstrated by going still and dropping through without the plant getting a grip, then caught Hermione when she came through. Harry and Ron followed. The winged keys took longer than Harry would have liked, a vast, dark space full of fluttering wings and a broomstick waiting. Harry was in the air in 30 seconds. He spotted the old iron key with the bent wing by flying in a spiral pattern from the outside in, which was faster than chasing individual keys through the flock. He had it in under 2 minutes. Hermione and Neville unlocked the door while he was still dismounting. Ron stood in front of the chessboard and didn't speak for a full 60 seconds. Harry watched him. The chessboard was enormous, the pieces were the size of people, stone-faced and patient, waiting. Ron walked along the edge of it, reading the board the way Harry had seen him read every other board, total focus, the social noise in him going completely quiet. "We're white," Ron said. "We go here." He pointed. "Hermione, you're the castle. Neville, bishop. Harry, knight beside mine." He looked at Harry. "You won't need to move." "You're sure?" "I see it," Ron said simply, and moved his first piece. Harry watched him work. Ron Weasley at a chessboard was a different person than Ron Weasley anywhere else. The amiable energy contracted to something focused and clean, something that did not second-guess itself. The board was a series of problems with solutions, and Ron moved through them like water finding a slope. 6 moves in, Ron said, "I need to sacrifice the queen." "Ron," Neville started. "I know," Ron said. "It's the only way through. The king's position doesn't open unless," he looked at his queen piece, who was looking back at him with stone patience. "She knows," he said, and moved her. The opposing queen took her. Ron stepped into the space it created and the checkmate snapped into place 3 moves later. The black pieces froze. The path through cleared. Ron was on his hands and knees in the corner, having been knocked sideways by the opposing knight's piece moving through the space he'd occupied, which he'd apparently calculated as an acceptable exchange. "Ron." Harry was beside him. "I'm fine," Ron said, with the voice of someone who was not entirely fine but was assessing the gap between their current state and the minimum necessary for forward progress. "Go. I'll wait here. Someone needs to be on this side anyway." He looked up. His forehead was bleeding slightly from the stone. "Go, Harry." Harry looked at him for a moment. Ron met his eyes with the expression of someone who'd chosen, fully and freely, and was not asking for anything back. "I'll get you out," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. Go. The troll was already unconscious, something had been there before them, and the sight of it stopped Harry cold for a half-second before he registered it as information rather than obstacle. Someone had been through. Not long ago. He moved, Harry said. Tonight. Quirrell's already in. Then we're behind him, Hermione said. Move, Harry said. The potions room gave Hermione exactly 32 seconds of work. She read the riddle once, lips moving, identified the correct bottle, and had Harry and Neville through before Harry had finished taking stock of the room. She looked at the bottle that would take her back. I'm going back for Ron, she said. It wasn't a question. Harry looked at her. Hermione, you need one person ahead and one person making sure Ron gets out, she said. You don't need me for what's in there. You need yourself. Her eyes were very direct. Go. We'll be here when you come back. He didn't argue. He wasn't built for arguments he'd already lost. He went through the black flame. The final chamber was lit with a strange sourceless light, and the mirror was there, enormous, gold-framed, the words Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on Wosi running around its top, and in front of it stood Quirrell. He was speaking to the mirror. Speaking in two voices, his own stuttering murmur and something beneath it, something that pushed against the room's air like pressure before thunder. Harry stepped into the chamber and Quirrell turned around. The mirror reflected the room and Harry in it, and in the reflection Harry saw his parents standing behind him, his mother smiling, his father with his hand on Harry's shoulder, and it took everything he had to look away from it. Not courage, just the knowledge that the reflection was not what required his attention. Potter, Quirrell said, and his voice had lost all of the stutter. Completely. Instantly. Of course. Of course it would be you. He wasn't afraid, Harry noted. He sounded almost resigned. You haven't gotten it, Harry said, looking at the mirror. Quirrell's face twisted. It won't give it to me. I have stood here for 20 minutes and it shows me nothing useful. Something shifted in his expression, the secondary presence pressing forward. But it will give it to you. Why? Because, and now the voice was not Quirrell's at all, it was coming from somewhere behind his face, something cold and purposeful and ancient with wanting, you are here not to use it. You would take the stone and give it to Dumbledore or destroy it and be quite content. The mirror rewards exactly that kind of irritating virtue. You know I'm not giving it to you, Harry said. I know, the voice said. I am going to offer you a trade instead. Harry was watching the mirror. His parents were still there in the reflection, his mother's hand raised slightly, his father's grip steady on his shoulder. He was not going to look at it. He was watching it peripherally because it was information, the mirror showed what you wanted most, and what it showed him told him things about himself he could examine later, not now. I have information, Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth, through the back of Quirrell's borrowed head. About yourself. About what you carry in your scar. About what must happen for you to live a full life. A pause. Things Dumbledore knows and has not told you. Dumbledore told me, Harry said. Silence. This afternoon, Harry continued. He told me everything. The Horcrux theory. My mother's research. What he believed I might have to do. He looked at Quirrell steadily. You have nothing to offer that I don't already have. Something moved across Quirrell's face, not his emotion, the thing behind it. What it was frustration, and underneath frustration was something that Harry recognized with unexpected clarity as the frustration of someone who had spent a very long time being the person with the most information in any room, confronting a situation where that was no longer true. You're 11 years old, Voldemort said. People keep saying that, Harry said. Walk away from the mirror. And if I don't? Harry reached into his pocket. He'd brought 3 things from his father's Auror kit beyond the music box and the communication discs. The third was a field-issue containment device, a small glass sphere etched with runes, designed to temporarily bind a target in a field that prevented spellcasting. He'd read the instructions 3 times. He'd practiced the activation sequence twice. He hadn't been certain he'd use it tonight. Now he was. "Then I stop you here," Harry said, "and Dumbledore comes in the morning and deals with whatever's left of you." He held Quirrell's eyes, or rather, held the eyes behind Quirrell's eyes. "I don't want to hurt Quirrell. I think he was an ordinary person before you got hold of him, and I think what you've done to him is the worst thing in this room, and that includes whatever you plan to do with the stone." Something flickered across Quirrell's face that was entirely Quirrell, brief and agonized and then gone. "Touch me," Voldemort said, "and you burn the vessel." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm not touching you." He activated the sphere. The runes lit. The containment field expanded from the sphere outward in a ring of pale fire that Quirrell tried to step back from and couldn't. The field had caught him, locked his movement, stilled his wand hand mid-reach. He stood frozen in the golden light of the mirror, and in the mirror Harry saw, just briefly, the reflection change, no longer Harry's parents but a man he didn't recognize, middle-aged and terrified, standing alone, and Harry understood with a cold certainty that what the mirror showed Quirrell was himself before the summer, himself as he had been, and the mirror was answering a want that Voldemort didn't know was in there. Harry walked to the mirror. He looked into it. He saw himself holding the stone. In his reflection's hand, solid and red and warm-looking. And then he felt something in his pocket, physical, real, pressing against his hip, and he reached in and took it out and it was in his palm. The mirror had given it to him. He looked at it. Warm, faceted, the color of good wine. He could feel it breathing. He looked at Quirrell, locked in the containment field, staring at him with 2 kinds of anguish. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," Harry said, and meant it. "Both of what happened to you." He turned and walked out of the chamber with the Philosopher's Stone in his pocket. The black flame closed behind him. He came back through the potions room into a chamber that held Hermione and a mobile, if bruised, Ron, who was leaning on Neville's shoulder and whose expression upon seeing Harry coming through the flame alone said several things he didn't put into words. Hermione looked at Harry's face and then at his pocket and then at his face again. "You got it," she said. "Yes." "And Quirrell?" "Contained. Temporarily. We need to get Dumbledore." "I already sent a message," Hermione said. She held up the second communication disc, Harry's father's aura equipment, which she had, apparently, appropriated from his bag at some point with the quiet confidence of someone certain they might need it. "I sent it when you went through the flame. I didn't know who else had a paired disc, so I sent it to Ragnarok and asked him to relay it to any order contact he had. Someone will have reached Dumbledore by now." Harry stared at her. "You put the disc in your bag and you didn't tell me what it was," she said, "so I looked it up." He kept staring. "The pairing instructions were in the lining," she added. "Anyway. We should go." They went. Up through the chessboard room, up through the key room, up through the devil's snare, through the trapdoor, back into the third-floor corridor where the cold November-becoming December air hit them like a reasonable argument against going any further tonight. Harry stood in the corridor and exhaled. Behind them, through 7 layers of protection and a black flame door, Quirinus Quirrell stood locked in a containment field in front of a mirror that was showing him the man he used to be, waiting for someone to come and deal with what was living behind his eyes. In Harry's pocket the stone sat quiet and warm. He looked at his friends. Hermione's hair was wild and her robes were singed at the hem. Ron was favoring his left side and had dried blood at his temple. Neville was pale but standing straight, and there was something in his face that hadn't been there at the start of the year, not just confidence, but the specific kind that comes from having chosen to go somewhere difficult and come back. "Thursday evening," Harry said. They looked at him. "We keep doing Thursday evenings," he said. "I think we might need it for more than 1 year." Ron made a sound that was half laugh, half pain. "Can we do it somewhere with chairs that aren't made of stone?" "I'll arrange it," Harry said. Dumbledore arrived 4 minutes later, with McGonagall and with the expression of a man who had received a relay message from a goblin bank at 1 in the morning and run a great deal of the way there. He stopped at the entrance to the corridor. He looked at the four of them. He looked at Harry's pocket. "Is it?" he started. Harry took out the stone and held it up. It caught the torchlight. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry with an expression that was not the careful warmth of a man managing his image, or the composed dignity of a man before the Wizengamot, or even the stripped honesty of a man in a Sunday afternoon classroom. It was something else. Something that had no calculation in it at all. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said. Harry put the stone back in his pocket. He didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would have been equal to the weight of the moment, and he knew better than to reach for words that weren't ready. But he let it land. He let himself feel it. Then he said, "Quirrell's in the last chamber. You should go." And Dumbledore went. McGonagall stood in the corridor looking at the four of them with an expression that was cycling through emotions too quickly to track: fury, relief, astonishment, something that was also, briefly, extremely close to pride, and said, in a voice that was impressively controlled given the circumstances, "My office. All four of you. Now." "Yes, Professor," Harry said. He followed her down the corridor, and the stone sat warm and quiet in his pocket, and somewhere beneath his scar something that had been pressing against him for 11 years was, very quietly, beginning to ease. Chapter 6. What was always yours? McGonagall's office at 1 in the morning was a different room than McGonagall's office during school hours. The fire was lower, the desk was clear of marking, and there was a tartan dressing gown over her shoulders that she made absolutely no acknowledgement of, as if dressing gowns were standard attire for emergency nocturnal interrogations and anyone who noticed otherwise was the one behaving incorrectly. She stood behind her desk and looked at the four of them arranged in front of it, and the silence went on long enough to become a thing with weight. Ron was still bleeding slightly. Hermione had a burn on her left sleeve. Neville was gripping Trevor the Toad, who had apparently been in his dressing gown pocket this entire time. Harry was standing with his hands loose at his sides and the stone still in his pocket, and the patience of someone who had been standing in front of disapproving adults since he could walk and had never once found it as frightening as they intended. "You," McGonagall said, and stopped. She tried again. "The three of you, all four of you, went through the trapdoor. Past the protections. Into the final chamber." "Yes," Harry said. "Where Professor Quirrell was." "Yes." "Who is currently contained," Harry said. "Temporarily. Professor Dumbledore is there now." McGonagall sat down, which was the first time Harry had ever seen her sit down with something other than intent. She sat down because her body made the decision without consulting her. She looked at the stone, which Harry had placed on the edge of her desk because carrying it in his pocket while having a conversation about it felt unnecessarily dramatic. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," she said, and something in her voice had shifted from the register of a teacher dealing with rule-breaking students into something more complicated and more honest. "How long have you known about the stone?" 6 weeks, Harry said. "Roughly. And you didn't come to me?" "No." She absorbed this. "Why not?" Harry considered his answer carefully, not to soften it, but to be precise. "Because the last time a trusted authority figure was given information about something involving me, they used it to arrange my life in ways that benefited their plans more than mine." He held her eyes. "I didn't know where your lines were yet." "I still don't, entirely." McGonagall looked like she'd been handed something very cold and sharp and was trying to decide how to hold it without cutting herself. Her eyes moved to the stone, then back to Harry, then to the other three. "Mr. Weasley," she said, and her voice had gone back to professional. "Madame Pomfrey. Now." "I'm fine," Ron started. "Mr. Weasley." Ron went. Neville went with him because Neville had apparently decided this was where his evening ended, which Harry thought was fair. He'd been extraordinary tonight and deserved a rest. McGonagall looked at Harry and Hermione, who had remained. "Miss Granger," she said. "The communication device. The relay message to Gringotts." "Yes, Professor," Hermione said. She did not apologize for it. McGonagall's expression did something complicated. "That was resourceful," she said. "Dangerously unorthodox and in violation of approximately 9 school rules, and resourceful." She picked up the stone, examined it, set it down. "The headmaster will want to speak with you both in the morning. Not tonight. Tonight you will go to the hospital wing, be examined by Madame Pomfrey, and sleep." She paused. "That is not a suggestion." "Yes, Professor," Harry said. She stopped them at the door. "Potter." Her voice had changed again, stripped of the official register entirely. "Your mother was one of my best students. In 30 years of teaching I can count on one hand the students who had her combination of gifts." She was looking at the stone on her desk, not at him. "I should have asked harder questions 10 years ago. I want you to know that I understand that now." Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about the letter he'd written to her in October, a formal, brief note from Lord Potter to the deputy headmistress, outlining his intention to take an active role in managing his affairs and requesting her awareness of the Wisengamot proceedings. She had replied, also formally, acknowledging receipt. Nothing more. But she'd attended every session of the review that staff schedules permitted. Harry had seen her in the gallery, always at the back, always in plain robes rather than academic ones. "I know," he said. "Good night, Professor." She looked at him then, directly, and what was in her face was not the warm pride of a teacher with a promising student. It was older than that and more specific. It was grief for the years, he thought. And the beginning of a different relationship with her own part in them. He left her to it. December arrived and the castle decorated itself with the systematic enthusiasm of somewhere that took seasonal transformation seriously. Frost on the windows became ice sculptures. The staircases grew garlands that moved slightly, as if breathing. The great hall acquired 12 enormous Christmas trees that McGonagall had transfigured into silver and gold with the efficiency of someone who did not consider this effort worthy of being impressed by. Quirrell was gone. Not dead. That distinction mattered, and Harry had been specific about it when Dumbledore had informed the school that Professor Quirrell had suffered a severe magical incident and would not be returning. What had been done to Quirrell was not his fault, and Harry had said so to Dumbledore in private with the directness he'd found was the only kind that got through the old man's instinct to manage the conversation. "He needs proper care," Harry had said. "Not Azkaban. Not a public trial. Care." Dumbledore had looked at him with that unguarded expression he'd developed in the last weeks of term. "Agreed," he'd said. And it had been done. Voldemort was gone from the school. What remained of him, the fragment that had been attached to Quirrell, sharing his body, burning through him from the inside, had fled when Harry's containment field disrupted the connection. Dumbledore had explained it carefully, using the same full information approach he'd adopted since their Sunday conversation. The fragment had not been destroyed. It had been displaced. It was somewhere, diminished and furious, without a host or a body, unable to reach the stone and unable to touch Harry. "My mother's protection," Harry had said. "Yes," Dumbledore had said. "When he tried to reach through the containment field and touch you, I believe he felt it. The counter-enchantment. He retreated rather than risk accelerating his own soul's destruction." A pause. "She saved you twice, Harry. Once in death. And once through her work, which I should never have read without your knowledge." The Philosopher's Stone had been returned to Nicholas Flamel. Dumbledore had facilitated this personally, which Harry had watched with a feeling that was as close as he was likely to get to satisfaction about anything involving Dumbledore. Flamel had sent a note through Dumbledore's office, elegant handwriting, very old ink, that read simply, "Tell the boy his mother's theoretical framework was brilliant and she was right. I verified it myself in 1984 and didn't know whose work it was. I'm sorry it took this long to say. Harry had put the note with his mother's letter in the satchel. The satchel was getting full of things. December 15th was Sirius Black's hearing. Harry could not attend. He was 11 years old and at school, and the hearing was at the ministry, and Bones had been firm on the subject of his presence being both legally unnecessary and logistically complicated. He'd accepted this with the patience of someone who understood that accepting reasonable constraints was different from accepting unreasonable ones. He waited in the common room instead. He'd told Hermione and Ron the date, and they'd settled in around him without making it into anything, Ron with his chess set, Hermione with her holiday revision, Harry with his father's Auror notes which he'd been working through methodically for 2 months. They sat by the fire and the common room was mostly empty, most of the school having gone home for Christmas, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The Goblin post arrived at 4:37 in the afternoon. Harry heard the tap on the window and was up before anyone else moved. He got to the window, opened it, took the letter. He read it standing there with the cold air coming in around him. Lord Potter, Sirius Orion Black was released from Azkaban at 2 o'clock this afternoon following a hearing in which the ministry was unable to produce any evidence of trial, charge, or formal proceeding against him. The Wisengamot subcommittee, by a vote of 11 to 3, has declared his imprisonment unlawful and ordered his immediate release and full exoneration. Compensation proceedings are ongoing. Mr. Black is currently in the care of St. Mungo's for assessment. 10 years in Azkaban requires significant medical attention, and this is expected to take several weeks. He has been informed of your existence and your role in initiating the petition. He asked me to tell you one thing, and I relay it precisely as he said it. Tell Harry his mum was right about everything and his dad would have been absolutely insufferable about the Quidditch. He will contact you when he is able. Bones. Harry stood at the window for a moment longer than necessary. The cold air was doing something to his face that he let it do, quietly, without examining it too closely. Then he turned around. Ron and Hermione were looking at him, and his face must have said enough because Hermione made a small sound and Ron said, "Yeah," and Harry said, "Yeah," and that was the whole of it for a moment. Then Hermione said, in her best attempt at practical neutrality which was not quite as neutral as she intended, "St. Mungo's will have him for a few weeks at least, so that gives you time to prepare. You'll want to have proper legal guardianship arrangements reviewed and, Hermione," Harry said. "Yes. Let me have the moment first." She looked at him. Then she closed her notebook. "Sorry," she said, more quietly. "Don't be," he said. "You're not wrong. Just 5 minutes." She nodded. Ron had already fetched 3 butterbeers from somewhere, which was either prescience or Ron Weasley simply understanding that most situations were improved by butterbeer, and Harry sat back down by the fire and held his and thought about a person he'd never met who had known his parents, who'd been James Potter's best friend since they were 11 years old, who'd been locked in a prison for a decade because of a sequence of events Harry was still reconstructing, and who had sent a message through a ministry solicitor that managed to be both heartbreaking and funny in approximately 14 words. He thought about his mother writing, "Your father is the finest person I have ever known," which is saying a great deal because I've known Sirius Black since I was 17 and he once talked his way out of a dragon encounter using only a phrase book and absolute confidence. He smiled. Properly, fully, the way he didn't always remember was available to him. Ron tapped his butterbeer against Harry's. Hermione opened her notebook again but didn't write anything yet, just held it, and that was the 5 minutes. The Wisengamot's full ratification came on December 19th, 2 days before the Christmas holiday properly began. Harry received Bones's summary at breakfast. He read it with the same careful attention he gave all her documents, annotating where he had questions and noting where things aligned with what Ragnarok had predicted in November. The censure was formal and permanent. Dumbledore's removal from the chief warlock position was ratified 14 to 9, which Bones noted in a margin annotation was a larger margin than expected. Financial restitution to the Potter estate was ordered in full. The sum, calculated with 10 years of compound interest by Gringotts, was a number Harry read twice and then set aside to think about later because its practical implications were too numerous to process over breakfast. 3 Wisengamot members who had facilitated the original executor appointment in 1981 received formal reprimands. 2 of them were people Harry had watched in the chamber, one of them was the witch he'd seen with the curdled expression, who had apparently provided testimony for the subcommittee that had been instrumental in moving the margin. He read her name and thought, she changed sides. Then he thought, she didn't change sides. She found out the truth and changed her position. That's different. Lucius Malfoy had abstained from the final vote. Harry noted this without surprise. Abstaining was Lucius Malfoy's way of being on the winning side without being visible about it, technically neutral, practically positioned to claim affiliation with whichever outcome consolidated more power. It was the political equivalent of standing in a doorway. Harry wrote a brief note and sent it with the Gringotts post before he'd finished his porridge. It was addressed to Draco Malfoy, not his father, and it said simply, "Your father abstained. I know what that means. When you're ready to have the actual conversation, I'm available." Draco looked up from the Slytherin table when his post arrived, read the note, looked across the hall at Harry. Harry met his eyes and looked away first, which was a choice, giving Draco the space to make his decision without the pressure of being watched making it. He poured more pumpkin juice and let it sit. Dumbledore called him to the office on the last evening of term. Harry went. He was always going to go, because Dumbledore was still the headmaster, still the most powerful wizard in Britain in raw terms, still a person who had information Harry needed and who had committed, in whatever way he was capable of commitment, to being honest. The relationship between them was not fixed. It was not trust. But it was something that could, with time and consistent honesty from Dumbledore's side, become useful. The office was the same as it had been in September, but it felt different in the way rooms feel different when your relationship to them has changed. Fawkes looked at Harry from his perch with those clear ancient eyes and made a sound that Harry had come to understand was a greeting specifically for him, which he found both flattering and strange. Dumbledore looked different too. Not older, his face was what it was, but something in his bearing had settled differently, the way things settle when a long effort is concluded. He looked, Harry thought, less like a man managing a great many things simultaneously and more like a man who had put some of those things down. "Sit down, Harry," he said, and it was the first time he'd said Harry's name without the particular careful warmth he'd been putting on it, which made it more real. Harry sat. "The term," Dumbledore said, "has been the most consequential of my career. In 40 years of running this school, I have dealt with dark wizards, outbreaks, crises of all varieties." He folded his hands. "I have never had a first-year student who filed Wisengamot proceedings, ran asset recovery operations, and personally secured the Philosopher's Stone against Voldemort before the Christmas holidays." "I had help," Harry said. "You organized the help," Dumbledore said. "There is a difference, and you know it." He looked at him over his spectacles. "I am not going to tell you what you did was right or wrong in terms of school rules, because that conversation would be somewhat absurd given the context. What I am going to say is this." He paused. "You are not the weapon I imagined when I first understood what you might be. I spent 10 years shaping a scenario in which your greatest power was your willingness to sacrifice yourself. What I should have been doing was getting out of the way of whatever you were actually going to be." He looked at his desk. "Your mother saw that." "I didn't." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then, what do you need from me now?" Dumbledore looked up. "I beg your pardon." "Going forward," Harry said. "The situation with Voldemort isn't resolved. The Horcruxes, if there are more of them, are still out there. You have more information than I do on all of it, and I have legal standing and goblin resources and whatever it is that kept him from touching me." He held the old man's gaze. "We can do this separately and badly, or we can do it together and better. I'm asking what you need from me." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The fire crackled. Fawkes made a soft sound. Somewhere in the castle a staircase moved with a slow, considered creak. "I need," Dumbledore said, slowly, "to tell you everything I know. All of it." Not in managed portions, not when I determine you're ready, everything. And I need you to tell me when I'm making the same mistakes again, because I suspect I will make them without meaning to, and I will need someone willing to say so plainly. He paused. Can you do that? Yes, Harry said. And in return? In return, Harry said, you work with Gringotts on locating the remaining Horcruxes. Officially, with documentation, with Ragnarok's team involved. Not a private operation. He paused. My mother's research gets formally attributed to her. Everything you've published or used that came from her work gets properly credited. Posthumously. He held Dumbledore's gaze. She was a researcher. She deserves to have existed as one. Dumbledore's expression did the stripped, unguarded thing. Yes, he said. Of course. I should have done that, yes. And the Weasley family, Harry said. Dumbledore went still. The funds that came from my estate to them, Harry said. I know it happened. I know you framed it as something my parents would have wanted. He kept his voice even. It probably was something they would have wanted, actually. The Weasleys fought in the war. They were loyal and they suffered for it. He looked at his hands. So I'm not going to pursue that through the Wizengamot. But I want it on record, with Gringotts, what the transfers were. So it's documented. Not hidden. And Arthur and Molly? Dumbledore asked carefully. Harry thought about Ron sitting in a cold castle corridor bleeding slightly from the temple because he'd sacrificed himself to a stone chess queen without hesitation. He thought about the way Ron had looked at him when Harry came back through the black flame with the stone, the specific relief in his face that wasn't about the stone at all. That's a conversation I'll have with Ron when the time is right, Harry said. Not yours to manage. Dumbledore nodded once. Then he picked up a small wrapped package from the corner of his desk and set it in front of Harry. This was your father's, he said. It came to me along with the executor appointment, and I should have given it to you years ago. He paused. I kept it because I thought it might be useful. I have used it, occasionally, for the school's benefit. He looked at it. I am ashamed of that now. Harry opened it. An invisibility cloak, old and fine and clearly not the same one he'd found in his father's Auror kit. This one was different, lighter, with a quality of air about it that was nothing like ordinary invisibility cloaks. He'd felt something like this in the vault but hadn't been able to identify it. This is a hallow, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression sharpened. You know about, I found my grandmother's notes in the vault last week. She'd done research on the Deathly Hallows. Harry looked at the cloak. This is the actual cloak of invisibility. Not a copy. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. There are two others. Yes. Harry looked at the cloak for a long time. He thought about his mother's letter in the satchel, and the photographs in the vault, and the Nimbus 2000 in the dormitory, and the stone which was now with Flammel, and Sirius Black in St. Mungo's who'd sent a message through a ministry solicitor that was equal parts heartbreaking and funny. He thought about everything that had been his and had been taken, and everything he'd gotten back, and everything that was still out there to be retrieved or built or understood. He picked up the cloak and put it in his bag. Thank you, he said. He meant it precisely as much as he said it, not more, not less. Happy Christmas, Harry, Dumbledore said. Happy Christmas, Professor, Harry said, and left. He found Hermione in the common room, alone with her revision and the Fire and Crookshanks, who had claimed the chair beside her as permanent territory and was regarding Harry's arrival as an imposition. How was it? She asked, without looking up from her charms notes. Productive, he said, which was what he always said, and she looked up because she always looked up when he said it, because the word carried different weight depending on which meeting it was following. She read his face. You made an arrangement with him. An honest one, Harry said. Conditional, ongoing, not based on trust yet. He sat down. He gave me my father's cloak. She looked at his bag. The hallow? Yes. She absorbed this. Then, Harry. What happens next year? It was the right question, not what did you get but what comes next, which was Hermione's natural orientation and which Harry had come to rely on as a kind of compass. She was always already at the next problem. Voldemort is still out there, Harry said. Diminished, without a body, but not gone. The Horcruxes are still out there. The Wizengamot has changed but it hasn't finished changing. He paused. Sirius will be out of St. Mungo's by February. That changes things, my guardianship situation, my living situation, a lot. He looked at the fire. I think next year is going to be harder than this one. Probably, Hermione said, without apparent concern. She picked up her quill. We should start reading ahead. It's Christmas. I'm revising charms. That's not reading ahead, that's consolidating. Harry looked at her profile, the concentration, the small frown at the textbook, Crookshanks pressing his orange head against her arm as if personally invested in her academic success. Hermione. Thank you. For this term. She put her quill down and looked at him, and for a moment the usual brisk efficiency of her face was just absent. She looked like what she was, a 12-year-old girl who'd spent her first term at a magical school navigating extraordinary circumstances with no roadmap, and who had done it exceptionally well, and who very rarely got to just be told so plainly. You're welcome, she said. Then she picked her quill back up. Now can we talk about the fact that our defense education is effectively non-existent and Quirrell's replacement is going to be whoever Dumbledore can find on short notice, which historically has not, Thursday evenings, Harry said. Yes, but we need a curriculum. We can't just freeform it forever. She'd already opened a fresh page. I was thinking we structure it by threat category. Basic offensive, basic defensive, creature-specific, dark magic identification, write it up, Harry said. Show me over the holidays. She was already writing. He watched her for a moment, the quick certain movement of her pen, the way she held the notebook with her left hand at the corner, the small automatic way she reached down to scratch Crookshanks without looking away from the page. He thought about Ron asleep upstairs with his bruised ribs and his chessboard on the nightstand. He thought about Neville who had gone home for Christmas carrying himself differently than he'd arrived, something in his back changed, something set. He thought about his mother's vault, full of photographs he hadn't finished looking through yet. His father's broom. The research journals he was only partway through, each page his mother's handwriting, each line evidence of a mind that had been working on problems nobody had fully understood yet. He thought about Sirius Black, somewhere in a hospital bed, healing from 10 years of something nobody should survive, who had known James Potter since he was 11 years old and would have things to tell Harry that nobody else could. He was 11 years old. He was lord of an ancient and noble house. He had a bank, and a legal team, and a cloak in his bag, and a stone delivered and a dark lord displaced and a case that had changed the shape of wizarding governance before Christmas of his first year. He also had charms revision due and Thursday evening sessions to plan and a godfather to meet and his mother's journals to read and approximately 100 questions about the Deathly Hallows that were not going to answer themselves. He opened his own bag and took out his charms textbook. Color me convinced, he said. Hermione looked up, satisfied, and turned the notebook so he could read her curriculum outline. It was already 3 pages. The fire crackled. The castle settled around them into its nighttime quiet, the particular quality of silence that a living building had when most of its occupants were sleeping. Outside, the first proper snow of the season was coming down over the grounds, covering the footprints from earlier in the week, covering the frost-silvered grass, covering the lake in a thin white breath that would melt by morning. Inside, 2 first-years sat by a Gryffindor common room fire and planned what came next with the same attention they gave everything, carefully, honestly, without pretending the difficulty away or waiting for someone older and wiser to make the decisions. Harry Potter had come to Hogwarts knowing nothing that mattered and had spent 4 months recovering what was his, not just the gold, not just the legal standing, but the shape of the people who had made him, the truth of what they'd built and what they'd believed and what they'd fought for. He had it now, not completely, not without gaps, but enough. Enough to stand on. Enough to work from. He was not finished. He suspected he was never going to be finished, because the world kept presenting new versions of the same essential problem, people with power making decisions about other people's lives because they were certain they knew better. He was not afraid of that problem. He never had been, which was the thing that people who tried to manage him always failed to understand in time. The Dursleys had tried to make him small and produced, instead, someone with extraordinary patience and zero instinct for deference. Dumbledore had tried to keep him ignorant and produced, instead, someone who treated information as the first and most essential resource. Voldemort had tried to kill him, and his mother had turned that moment into a protection that was still working 11 years later. You could not make Harry Potter afraid of the thing that was coming. You could only make him more prepared for it. He turned a page. Outside the snow came down. The fire threw its warm light across the room. He read. 3 weeks later, on a cold January morning with frost on the Ollery windows and Hedwig watching him with the fond disapproval she reserved for early correspondence, Harry wrote 2 letters. The first was to Ragnarok, formally requesting that his mother's research be attributed to her in all existing publications where it had been used. Dumbledore had provided the list, a list that was longer than Harry had expected and shorter than it probably should have been, and Ragnarok had agreed to facilitate the formal academic record amendment with the Ministry's research registry. The second letter was to Sirius Black. He sat with it for a while before writing it. He didn't know what to say to someone he'd never met who was also, in some way he couldn't fully map yet, the closest thing to family he had. He didn't know how to begin a relationship that should have existed since birth and was starting instead in the aftermath of everything. He wrote, "Dear Sirius, I don't know how to start this. I've been told you knew my dad better than anyone. I've been going through his things since August and I keep finding objects I don't know the stories behind. If you're up to it, when you're better, I'd like to know the stories." He paused. He thought about his mother's letter, about her description of Sirius talking his way out of a dragon encounter with a phrase book and absolute confidence. He added, "My mum mentioned the dragon story. I want to hear that one first." He sent it. Hedwig took off from the Ollery window into the January sky, white against grey, and was gone. Harry watched her until she was a speck and then nothing, carrying words towards someone who had known his parents when they were alive and remembered them as people rather than symbols, someone who would give him something no document or vault or legal proceeding could produce. Not a story about the boy who lived. A story about James and Lily Potter, who had been real, and young, and brilliant, and funny, and gone too soon, and who had left behind, in research notes and vaults and photographs and letters and the stubborn, careful mind of their son, everything they were. Harry turned away from the window. The corridor waited. The day waited. He walked into it.